independence, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And so for those of you who are wondering why we chose to have a special meeting, we want the record to be set straight as to what's going on inside of Buffalo Public Schools to keep our children and in many cases, our community safe. There are a lot of questions and concerns that the public has, and we want to make sure that we are clear today on what we are doing. We're also going to make clear on what next steps are and what else we need for the community as well as the city and the county to do to assist us. We are Buffalo Public Schools. We are strong, but we cannot do this alone. Okay, with that said, I'm turning this over to the superintendent. Thank you.
Hear, hear, Board President. Thank you. It's a great way to start. It's absolutely accurate. I want to thank this board for this opportunity to share the work that we have been engaged in with respect to safety and security. The night that I was appointed as interim superintendent, I was very clear that there were two main focuses for me. Number one was safety and security, and number two was improving our student outcomes. When we talk about safety and security, our board president is absolutely correct. There cannot be one person that can alone ensure the safety and security for more than 40,000 folks, because it's my goal that not only will all of our children be safe every day, but all of our staff, any visitors, any parents that are in and around our schools or school offices, as well as community-based partners that may be working in any of our schools or offices. So that's a lot. And it's going to take due diligence of our entire City of Buffalo community. And so I will be sharing tonight how we have begun conversations and work to make sure that that is happening. So I want to commend the staff because, you know, it's a tireless effort to make sure that we're working to keep all of our children and our schools safe. I want to commend, I see one of our parent leaders here, for working with us every day on helping to ensure that there is safety. So, Admir, if you can go to the next slide. That's okay. All right. So this is a board of education that is very, very aware of rising incidences of violence in and around schools, nationally, statewide, and unfortunately, locally. We have a very diverse board. They bring very different experiences to the table. And so they are very aware of these incidents. This board has an expectation that immediate and appropriate progressive safety measures will be taken for all violent and threatening occurrences against any staff, students, and or visitors who are near or on our school properties, as well as on any of our buses. They passed a code of conduct this year that was updated. We update it annually. We speak with the community about the code of conduct. We do focus groups with students, and the board has to approve it, and they have. As evidence that the board places safety and security as a high priority, I've shared for the board tonight, I'm not sure if in your downtime, which I'm sure you have very little of, but in your downtime, what I've shared for you tonight on your green packets are all of the policies that this board has passed, Board of Education for Buffalo Public Schools has passed in recent years. And there are more than 20 policies. That does not even include resolutions that may also have been passed by the board. That's evidence of how important safety and security is to this particular Board of Education. Mir? Here? Yeah, thank you. Get used to this. I've been up here. So I would be remiss. I know that tonight we are talking about safety and security. Well, this board has been engaged in a relationship with the Council of Great City Schools, which is a body that works very closely with large urban school districts across our country. And I would be remiss if I did not align what the work is that's happening in schools for safety and security purposes to the goals that the board has set forth for me as their superintendent for this school year. We have 3 goals. The first is that third grade economically disadvantaged students will achieve a reading level of 39% by June 30th, 2024, as evidenced on our Dibbles assessment. The second is that third graders who are also economically disadvantaged will achieve a math proficiency score of 15.9%, again, by June 30th, 2024, and we'll be looking at our iReady assessment for that. And the final is that our 4-year unofficial graduation rate for 12th grade students will not decrease from the 79.1% that our students experienced last year. So when I met with principals, I shared with them that I call this our 999 goals, because each one of those goals have a number 9 in it. 39% for ELA, 15.9% for math, and 79.1% for graduation rate. And I know that it's taking hold because I met with a principal today and she remembered 999. So it's easy to remember. We'll have this information in schools so that everybody is abreast of it. But in order for us to meet these goals, our students have to feel safe and secure every day. Our teachers, our cafeteria staff, our administrators, parents who may be in our schools, board members who may be visiting our schools, have got to feel safe and secure so that we can focus on these student outcomes that this board has set forth for this year. Next slide. So for tonight, my purpose in sharing this presentation or this plan is that I want to ensure that all of our board members will leave this meeting knowing and understanding some of the updated and specific strategies that our school district has been engaged in to keep students and staff safe, as well as visitors. But to further be transparent, we could sit in a room and just close the doors and just meet alone. But this is a way for us to be transparent and to get the word out to the community about what it is we're doing, what is important, and how we continue to need their support. So the Buffalo Public Schools, I want to start by sharing that we comply with all federal and state education laws. And as such, all of our schools have a building level emergency response plan. And that plan is created by the school leader and his or her leadership team. And that team can consist of many different positions or roles in a school building, but all have to do it. And when they do, they get support from our associates of school leadership. All of our schools have an associate superintendent over them. They work along with the principals, our chief of operations, works along with the principals as well as our chief and executive directors of school security. So it's a real collective effort. Once the plan has been approved, we submit that plan to New York State Education Department and it's filed. We also maintain a copy here. So all of our schools have plans that talk about the specifics logistically because each school is a little different and each school has needs that are a little different. And so all of our schools, have this plan. It is a plan that is confidential. We don't release it to everyone, but it is a plan and we are in compliance with what the State Education Department requires. Next slide, please. So now we'll start to get into the meat of some of the things that we are doing. Some have been long-standing things, some have been more recent, and some of the things that we are planning to do this year. So we spend most of our time focusing on preventive initiatives, because if we get it right there, then we don't have so much work when we get to intervention and responses. So we put a lot of effort into preventive measures. And I won't read all of the items that we have listed here, but I'll share some. Character counts is in most all of our elementary schools. PBIS, if you've ever been in any of our schools and you see the red, yellow, and green triangles, most of you know what those are. We do pro-social skill building with our little ones. We have a second step curriculum. Academic initiatives like CLRI help our children to develop positive self-images and self-concepts about themselves. Our code of conduct, when we do our code of conduct and the board approves it, schools then have their teachers and staff explain to students what is in the code of conduct, what the expectations are. They send the documents home. We have the documents translated into many languages, not all, but many. And so, everyone knows exactly what our disciplinary expectations are. The ELT program is another initiative because we know that when children are in a structured, supportive activity after school hours, there's less likelihood that they will get into trouble. We were able, through our ARP and ESSER funds, to hire additional school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, and that's important. That's important because, again, we want to do as much as we can on that preventive end. We have a new initiative that's taking place, WASED. We believe that that is another curriculum initiative that will be meaningful, exciting, and engaging for our children, that they will enjoy it, and that those are things that help children to stay on the right path. In addition to that, we do mandatory professional development on bullying and harassment. And this year, we partnered with the University of Buffalo, and we've always sent some staff to that professional development opportunity. But this year, we targeted principals. Because what we know about bullying and harassment is that it's hard work. It's not easy. And, we don't want staff because it's uncomfortable when you're dealing with bullying and harassment. It's not comfortable. Our teachers and administrators went to school to educate children, to teach, to ensure that there's teaching and learning. And when there's bullying that's happening, whether it's amongst children, amongst staff to children, it can be uncomfortable. And so we had to implore the experts to help us so that when it's seen, we know how to get in there and engage whatever is happening, disrupt it, stop it. And so we sent principals this year out to UB. They were also able to log on to Zoom if they weren't able to go out there. And we anticipate that we're going to continue expanding that relationship. So our Human Resource Department initiates a mandatory training that all staff in schools and throughout the district must participate in. It's an online course, a few hours long, and you have to certify that you have gone through that course, that you understand what bullying, harassment are, and that, you know, when you see those things, that there are certain steps, or if you are the victim of any of those things, there are certain steps that we are expected to take to try to disrupt that. So that's a big thing this year. We also will be engaging, we're in the process of engaging in a behavioral screening for all of our children. That is huge. That's huge. So it won't just be targeted for children that may be on the radar as having issues. All of our children, because you could be a child that is not on the radar for having issues. And we want to do a quick screening. It's very quick, it's very easy, it's developmental, so that children who are younger take a different screening than those who are older age. But that's going to be huge, and it will again be another step in us being able to identify early if a child is having any issues. So those are some of the preventive measures. Now, we look at things in tiers in the district, and so when we do all of this work preventively, the hope is that we decrease children experiencing any challenges. But we know that even with all of the preventive work that we're doing, there will still be some that will need more support. And something will happen where, you know, it could be that the student needs to have a parent conference. The student doesn't still have the skills necessary to resolve a conflict, you know, in a positive way. And so something happens, and at that point we have interventions that our staff offers to our children. And some of the interventions that we have, we are partnering with community-based organizations that bring very specific skill sets that we don't have. And so some of our children in school get to participate in a course that is on homicide prevention. And it's been very, very well received. We have mental health we have mental health agencies in our schools providing counseling. We partner with the peacemakers. They do incredible work with our children. They're credible messengers. Not only do they know the children, oftentimes they know the children's parents. They know the children's grandparents. They're familiar with the communities that the children come from, and so they trust them. We work very closely with our MVP parent organization. We work very closely with our DPCC. I don't want to start calling out parent organizations because I don't want to forget any, but we work closely with our parent Congress because it's, again, going to take all of us hand in hand working together to address when students or parents are having issues. And then restorative justice. I know that at our last meeting, there was thought that, you know, it's a word that's commonly used now. You hear it all the time, restorative justice, restorative justice. But this district really is committed to restorative justice. And, you know, it's something that will take years for us to fully embrace. Again, we have 30,000 children, 8,000 staff, but we have been working at this for years. And I know that because in former positions, I personally had the responsibility of making sure that all of our building principals and assistant principals were trained, and I did the training. So I know that the principals and assistant principals who have been around for some time have received the training, but it takes a lot of support too. It takes a lot of support. Restorative justice is not just a buzzword, it's hard work. It's work that requires a skill set because, you know, you want to jump in and you want to solve issues when they're happening. And let's face it, in a school building, there's enough happening in a day that as a building leader or a counselor, you want to resolve it and you want to move on to the next thing. And restorative justice requires, some time. It requires some time to peel some layers. It's deep, it's meaningful, and it works. And we are a restorative justice district. As the leader of this district, the way that I always operate and always have is in a restorative way. So I lead the charge with that. There are 3 areas, 3 goals of restorative justice. And the first is accountability. Restorative justice requires, when you have done harm to someone, that you take accountability for what you have done. So if I am Principal A and you've done something to harm me, and I just say, you're suspended, you're out of here, I don't know if you've really taken accountability for that. It's very difficult when you've harmed someone to sit across from that person and look in their eyes and hear about the harm that you have done. And that is what restorative justice requires, that level of accountability. It's also about building relationships. And we're big on building relationships. It's very important for our children when they come into school to know that every single one matters. Somebody knows their name, and they matter, and they want them to be safe and secure every day. So building relationships is something that, I'm expecting cafeteria staff, security staff, nurses, teacher aides, assistants, custodians, principals, assistant principals, all of the staff in schools to be working on building relationships, not just in room 110 in the guidance office or the social worker's office. It's all of us. It's all of us. And the final thing that restorative justice is designed to do is to early on help address underlying issues. Early on, help you to address underlying issues that cause delinquent behaviors. Because our children all come in with an invisible backpack. They come in all looking the same, ear pods, Jordans, jackets, whatever it is that they have, all looking the same. And if you don't have a relationship with them and you ask them, how are you? I'm fine, miss. But there's an invisible backpack that they have. That's why it's so important that building relationship piece, because I know the importance of having a school leader stand out front or in that vestibule or a counselor or whoever it is, a trusted staff person, that when they're coming in, you can look at them and you can know today's going to be a difficult day. So rather than to just send you upstairs, business as usual, come to my office, have a seat, and let's talk. So restorative justice works. It's not just a buzzword for our district. We are not where we want to be. I would not say that we are. I will say that, we continue to train, we continue to support, and we will continue to get better and better. And each year that we have implemented this, it is getting better and better. So we do believe in restorative justices. For this year, as far as interventions, something that will be implemented, there's training that's required for this. But when children, the most serious thing that we can do as a school district is a long-term suspension, no matter what you've done. That's the most serious thing that any principal can do as far as disciplining a student. The way that it has worked in the past is that if you've done something that's a level 4 infraction and you receive a long-term out-of-school suspension, you go through your hearing, and then it's either substantiated or it's not. If the charge is substantiated, then you get a disposition for how long you'll be out of school, you receive instruction, and you go back. Very little restorative work in that piece. Very little work that would help to guarantee that whatever got you suspended this time, when you confront again that same person in that same situation, that you'll do something different. And so what we have are students that continuously, it's a small number of children experiencing high needs over and over and over and over. It's not that we have, most of our 30,000 children come to school every day, doing the right thing, expecting to learn. It's a very small percentage that have high needs. So what we want to do is, in that process, inject some counseling and some support. What we know in order to do it effectively, it's going to require some training. It's going to require some training. But before you go back into a classroom and you have to sit again across from someone that you had conflicts with, and the same situation happens, before you go back into that, because it's almost setting you up to do it again. Why wouldn't you? You got out of school for a few days, so why wouldn't you? So we want to give some support so that when you sit across again, you have a different outcome. And that support will be re-entry back into the school. We'll be working with principals so that they can identify a team that will be able to meet with that young person. If possible, we'd love for a parent to be a part of that too. But we don't want to keep children out of school any longer than they have to be waiting on a parent to show up, because sometimes they are able to and sometimes they are not. But certainly when that student shows up, sitting with a team in a restorative way to talk about and help them to develop and get skills so that if they get into a situation like whatever happened to get them long-term suspended, they have a different outcome. I'm really excited about that piece. And then, once we have intervened, the next step is, responding. What do we do after? What do we do after a situation has happened in a school, on a bus, on the way to school, on the way home, where something violent has happened? I know that it may seem like, it's just suspend, suspend, suspend. It is not. It is not. We have an active crisis team that is outstanding. It's a small team of folks. You think we had 40, but we don't. Very small number, but they are outstanding. They go into schools in the most difficult situations. After things have happened that you don't even want to think about, they go in and they help the principal to create communications. They meet with staff. If it's early morning, they come in early. If it's after school, they stay. If it's on the weekend and I find out that something has happened, I'm texting my chief of student support and she gets the crisis team out there. If it's clothing that children need, because we all know, when you look good, you feel good. And so, sometimes I could look at my students and know it was a tough night the night before. And it's going to be a tough day if we don't do something to help you to feel good about who you are and that you matter. So whatever it is, in any way that our crisis team can help, they help. For children who may have been in a fire, they help. And, we even reach out when we find out that something has happened to children that don't even go to Buffalo Public Schools. That's how committed this team is. So if we hear about something that has happened at a charter school, this team has reached out at certain points in times to help those children too, because it's all of us in this together. So those are some of the examples of some of the things that we're engaged in. One of the things that this year we so far are establishing stronger communication protocols between the Buffalo Public School District and the Buffalo Police Department. If no other departments or schools talk to each other, I got to know every day that our security teams are talking. That's important. If nobody else is, security must. They must. And so these daily debriefings that are happening are important. The monthly meetings that I engage in are important, because when we come out of the meetings, we got to be speaking with one voice, and it's got to be one mission and one vision to keep our children safe and secure in schools. Next slide. So we're going to move now to talk a little bit about our security folks. So our first responders, which I consider security officers, have a really hard job. Just like the fire department, just like police officers, correction officers, because where most people see something not good happening and want to run away from it, this is a team that runs towards helping to resolve and bring some control and calm to situations. So we are really careful about who we put in front of our children. That's important. I work very closely with our chief of human resources, and she knows that I'm very serious about us being careful who we put in front of our children, especially when you're expected to deal with high anxiety situations, which is oftentimes what our security officers deal with. And so I shared here with you some of the requirements for being a school security officer. Because I get questions about, why is it so difficult to get more school security? Our expectations are high. They're very high. We're not going to lower that. The requirement is that they have to complete an application. They have to have a high school diploma. They must live in the city of Buffalo. The interview process is not easy because, again, we're serious about this. They have to pass exams, go through screenings, and have experience with monitoring safety. And, I want to give a shout out to our human resource department, to our security department, to all of our building leaders that sit in on these interviews, because when I came on board, I made this a priority. If it's a priority for me, it's got to be a priority for everybody. And it is. It is. So you'll see on the next slide, I believe, how many security staff we have, where we have come from, and where we are right now, and where I'm looking for us to be by the end of 2025. So we knew that we needed to get an experienced chief of school security. We knew that. The person needed to have experience not only in law enforcement, that piece was important, but someone who was familiar with our schools, who knew our schools, who had worked in our schools, and who, it's just a bonus, had graduated from one of our schools, Kensington High School. So that was important. It's a new cabinet position that was created. I want to thank the board for approving this position. It's fairly new. She's been in the position maybe 1 year, a little over a year, and there's a lot of work that has happened and will continue to happen in that position. And then we have an executive director of school leadership who I know that you all know and love, because he is committed to the 10th degree to keeping children safe. He's also a person who is familiar with our schools. He's had a long-standing relationship with the Buffalo Public Schools, and he is serious about this work. Not only from 8 to 4, Monday through Friday. You will find him at games on the weekend. You'll find him at community school programs on the weekend, after-school programs. He doesn't stop. It's an exempt position, and we truly value it. We have 2 supervisors in that department. They primarily work in all of our schools, supporting the work of our school security staff, but they also, and you'll hear a little bit about, where we need some help, when there are absences, they'll go in and fill in. And I appreciate that, because it's not just a title, it's about the work. It's about the work and keeping everyone safe. And then we have 1 clerical staff. So when we get down to talking about actual security officers that we have working in our schools, last year, we had 79 at the end of the year. We had 79 BPS security staff. 66 of them were active, 13 were inactive. 9 were out on comp, 2 were out on medical leaves, and 2 were out on admin leave. That's where we were last year. Where we are at the start of this year, as of today, is that we have 91 school security officers. We've increased from 66 active to 78 active. We still have 13 who are inactive, but I'm very happy to say that we don't have any that are out on admin leave. We don't have any that are out on administrative leave. Our goal is to get to 137 school security officers by the end of June 2025, and that aligns to our 5 by 2025 visionary statements that we have. So again, I just want to give a shout out to everyone that has been working diligently and has made this a priority, because safety really is the #1 priority in our school district. Next slide. So school assignments, I've handed out a sheet for you so that you can take a look at specifically where school security officers are placed. But I do want to share with you that the way that school security staff is placed is done in a data-driven, fair, and systemic manner. We had to put some, for lack of a better word, guardrails up on how security officers were being placed in high schools. And some of the things, not only in high schools, but for some of the considerations that were made, we look at the number of students who are enrolled in schools. That's just one of the considerations that we look at. You've got a large building, more students. We want to have more staff being able to help monitor that. We also take a look at the number, and I don't have it here, but the type of safety infractions that schools are experiencing, because you could be a school that's small in number, but have really high needs. We take a look at, wherever possible, being able to balance with gender. So we're inclusive. We hire male security officers and we hire female security officers. And then wherever we're lucky enough to get security officers that may be bilingual, certainly we have schools and a very diverse student population. We place our security officers where there are those kinds of needs in schools. What I'm super excited about, because I've been around Buffalo schools, all of you know, for a long, most of my life, and I don't recall having assigned security officers in elementary buildings. That is huge. It's huge for our district, and I believe that, it's something that other school districts will be looking to also implement. It's very important. When I first thought about the idea of a school security officer being in an early childhood school, you would think, well, why? Why? Our little ones exhibit concerns, and sometimes you get younger parents that need supports also. Mm-hmm. And so this is why we have school security officers at 21 of our elementary schools. This summer, we had summer school, and the buildings that had our Evolve scanners implemented, we knew that we needed a person there who was trained to engage with the children as they were coming in and move them through the scanners. And so those are the schools right now. That's the first phase of schools that were able to have school security in them. But we've got about 30 plus security officers that are in the pipeline to possibly be hired. Maybe not all, but out of that 30, certainly 25, I'm hoping, will be hired, and we will be placing them as needed in elementary schools and additional security officers in high schools. So one of the things that I've learned that makes it a little difficult with our assignments is that contractually, security is able to use comp time and personal time without prior notice. And so there are times that for whatever the reasons they need to be out, and principals may not have been aware prior to that day that that's going to happen. So then on a pivot, our security team has to try to make sure that, you know, there's coverage at those schools also. It's a puzzle every day that they come in, that they're trying to maximize the supports at all of our schools, and especially our highest needs schools. But again, as we continue with our hiring, that will just keep getting better and better also. Next slide. So Buffalo Public Schools works with the Buffalo Police Department. We work with the NFPA, we work with the Erie County Sheriff's Department, we work with the DA's office. You know, our table seats are open. It's going to take all of us working together. And so one of the things that I implemented shortly after being approved and appointed in this position was to develop meetings with the police commissioner. And not only with him, but with his leadership team and with my leadership team. And we have frank and honest conversations. Frank and honest. But when we leave the room, we're speaking with one voice, one vision to accomplish one mission, and that is keeping all of our children safe every day. And so we fund, and we have for quite some time, a person who was on a police force who was at the chief level. We fund that position 100%, and that's a person that is there to provide direct supervision to his team of Buffalo police officers, and it includes a lieutenant and 11 school resource officers. I believe that number is up from 8 school resource officers that we had 2 years ago. We're at 11 now. And the role of the school resource officer is to really partner with our schools. They have to understand that they are working with children. Even if they're 18 years old, they're working with children in the structure of a school building. So we look for our school resource officers to be partners and problem solvers with our school leaders. Again, it's very important to me that when it comes to security, there are no gaps. There can be no gaps. There has to be trust, and it has to be a close professional relationship between the Buffalo Police Department and school and district leadership. This allows for clear, cohesive communication and a safe atmosphere in our schools and offices to exist. It is important for me to say that school resource officers do not solely work with the Buffalo Public Schools. They work with schools throughout the city of Buffalo, private schools, Catholic schools, and charter schools. So I wish I could say that, you know, they solely work with us, but I cannot. They work with all schools in the city of Buffalo. And again, you know, at the bottom I shared that, you know, I also have regular meetings with the chief of security for the NFTA. Whenever things happen in schools and 911 is called, usually it's the fire department, ironically, that gets there very, very quickly. We work with them, Erie County Sheriffs, and the district attorney's office and his staff. We're all working together to keep Buffalo Public Schools safe. Next slide. So I just wanted to educate the board a little bit on something that I recently became educated on. And it's this new vocabulary word out there that's called swatting. I never heard of swatting until last year. when one of our schools got involved, unfortunately, in a swatting incident. And what swatting is when someone makes a prank phone call to 911 saying that there's an active shooter in a school. And the purpose of that is to dispatch a large number of police officers to a location. You can imagine that when the officers get to that location, they don't kind of do business as usual where they may call a principal and say, hey, you know, I'm outside of something going on. They don't press a buzzer and wait to be buzzed in. They storm into a school because they're there to save lives. They've gotten a call that there's an active shooter in a school. And so when they come into that building, they're coming in on a rescue mission. Now, on the other side, you can imagine if you were in a school that day, just visiting, what that's like, where officers are coming into a school and they're not asking questions, they're not warm and fuzzy at that time, they're trying to get control of what they believe is a very, very dangerous, life-threatening situation. And it's a lot. It's a lot when it happens. It didn't just happen in the city of Buffalo. It's happening nationally in schools. And, you know, what happens is that the school day is disrupted. The students and the staff are stressed. They feel traumatized, frightened. Parents start calling parents. What's going on at this school? I see 50 police cars at this school. What's going on? The parents can't get through. It really is a very, very scary situation. And I hope that, you know, there's something that can happen so that, you know, we can put an end to it everywhere. But until we do, the best thing that we can do is to prepare, prepare, prepare. So we have to, and we are, talking to staff, talking to students. We have to inform our parents on what this is. We have to have practice drills because, you know, I wish that if something like this happened, everybody's in class, you can just close the doors and you know, shelter in place. But the reality is it could happen. You could be in the cafeteria, you could be in the restroom, you could be in the hallway changing classes. And so we have to prepare now our children for if something like this happens. It's not time for you to stop an officer and say, what's going on? What's happening? Teachers can't do that either. They have to, on a pivot, be able to listen, follow direction, and take safety measures. Yes. So we will be working very closely so that, you know, should something like this happen, we will be prepared. So we'll be sharing this at principal meetings, and then we've got to go through some drills. Unfortunately, that is where we are. Next slide. And then I've listed over this past year the training that our school security staff have engaged in, and it's a lot. They went through almost a 2-week boot camp this summer, and they're trained on all of these things and more. We have to, by law, have situated drills. We do fire drills. There's a certain number that the New York State Education Department expects that all school districts will participate in, because again, it's about practice, so that if something happens, it's seamless and you just know how to respond. We're practicing lockdown drills, shelter in places, and lockout drills with our Buffalo Police Department partners. The purpose of all of these drills, all of this training, is preparation. We want to make these learning experiences for staff because it is unnerving. Our staff are educators. They're educators. They're not law enforcement. So, you know, we have to help teach our educators now how to, if these things happen, keep the children calm, they stay calm, and everybody is safe. We want to continuously improve. We have to continuously improve in these areas and coordinate with law enforcement, because when things happen, sometimes everybody wants to help, and you start getting lots of folks there counselors from agencies start reporting and law enforcement starts reporting. It's got to be coordinated, or you know, that just creates more anxiety. So the more that we practice, we'll continuously improve in these areas, but we got to start somewhere. Next slide. And then there are some operational and logistic safety measures that we have put into place. Every single one of our schools has a first responders group of staff. Every single one. And it's up to the principal to identify who's on that first responder list in their buildings. Sometimes it may be an assistant principal, others it may be a counselor, it may be a custodian, it may be a teacher aide, and these things go into their plan so that we know if something happens at a school, who is that first responder grouping of folks that knows when something happens, what their role is in that building. All of our schools have functional defibrillators. They are prominently marked in locations, and there are staff who are trained, phys ed teachers, coaches that know how to use those defibrillators if they need to. They have training in CPR, so they're able to get in there and provide support if needed. All of our schools have security technology. We have cameras in all of our schools and throughout the school buildings, inside and outside. We have evolved metal detectors. I had a meeting out at Highmark Stadium a few weeks ago. You go, you walk through the scanner. It's the same scanners that our children use. You don't even think about it. And I'll tell you the truth, the children really don't have issues with it at all. They've gotten on board. It's what we do at the airport. It's just a part of where we are in society. So I have a deadline that by December, I don't know why it says 2023, yeah, this December, that all of our schools will have installation of these scanners. We also now have scanners at our athletic fields. So we have one out at our Riverside field, and we have one at our All High location. Our school buses, our first student buses, have multiple cameras on them to help ensure the safety of our children. We're continuing to hire bus aides. We're going to continue until we get bus aides on all of our school buses. That's what we want. We're increasing those numbers, and we want to continue to do that. And then we had to improve our visitor policies. There was a situation that happened in Texas over a year ago, and it caused a lot of us to pause and to think about, folks that come into the building. And we had to step by step by step sequentially think that out and what we could do to try to keep everybody safe in the buildings. And again, I don't hear a lot of concern about having to come into the visitor entrance. That's what we expect. Not a side door, not a basement door, the visitor entrance. I sent a letter because I thought it was only fair that parents and caregivers and visitors know that when you come in, the camera's working. And we see who you are. We expect that you will be buzzed in to the building. When you come into the building, you will go through the Evolve scanner. You will be escorted to the main office. We're expecting you to sign in, no different than if you go to the hospital or most businesses. You sign in, share what your business is there, and everybody's safe and everything is great. We also, this year, implemented a spectator practice. And I know it's getting attention. I know that. But my only goal is, and it'll continue to be, safety. Safety for everybody. That's what I want. For everybody. And so, you know, we initially went hard on that spectator policy. I mean, I admit it. I went hard on it. Because when I hear that, you know, we've got young people and that our school security was having difficulty getting things to a controllable state, and our Buffalo Police Department was having difficulty getting things to a controllable state, and then I get in my vehicle and I ride by, because that's the kind of superintendent I am, at 9 o'clock at night on Main Street in Mercer, and I see hundreds of children, some engaged in physical stuff, you know, some doing the right thing, but it was certainly a situation that caused for pause. And so I went to the extreme of trying to bring some control there. But I'm also a superintendent that is restorative and that listens. And so when I hear, you know, things that are rational, I can on a pivot say, that makes sense. And so we were able to say that rather than just having, you know, each athlete and each cheerleader have 3 visitors that could come to the game, that as long as you are with an adult. And if I have parents who are listening, we need your support. We need your support. You know your children. You're the expert on your children. You know their triggers. You know how to bring calm to them. And we need your support, because anytime you get hundreds of young people and it's minimal support, and even law enforcement is having a challenge with getting things safe, I get concerned. I get concerned. And then I have to do, because I got to be able to sleep at night, and I have to be able to answer to a board, that I have done everything within my power to help mitigate anything from happening to any single student. So I relaxed it some. We have a committee set up. We're going to meet. We're going to talk about it. But it cannot just be Buffalo Public Schools has to do this, this, and this. Where are you in the equation? That's what I'm going to want to know. Because in addition to hearing from some, I'm hearing from homeowners in that area, and they got concerns. They got concerns themselves for safety. So I want us to have a collective, productive committee that comes together and we talk about it. And we together come out with what is best to keep all of our children safe. So, okay, I'll get off my soapbox there. Next slide. But it leads into where I'm going for the next slide. It really does take a village. It really, I know that's a cliche, you know, we've all heard it, it takes a village. But community partnerships under my leadership matter. They are valued. Andrew Carnegie, I think, said it best, that teamwork is the ability to work together for a common vision. I can get out of the way. We gotta all sit around a circular table and talk about it, because it's going to take all of us. It matters. We have now more than 100 community partners. We have a compendium document that's huge, huge. I believe it's online, www.buffaloschools.org, and it shares at every school level what community partners are in our schools, all working together to increase our effectiveness. But I've listed here some of the partnerships that we have. We partner with community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, law enforcement, judicial, governmental, civic leaders, healthcare providers, private foundations, coaches, media, and even individuals who come in and just want to help. We're partnering with everyone that is interested in helping us work for this common vision of safety and security and improving student outcomes. Some of the accomplishments of bringing folks to the table is that We've cut down, I think, on response time when there are serious infractions. It makes a difference when the superintendent can text different entities and say what's going on here or there. That makes a difference. Improve monitoring of after-school activities at Fountain Plaza. Last year, we had some concerns. You know I'm transparent, and I keep it real. We had some concerns. And all summer, we had to work as a team with various partners, working with our parents, because we had to get some of that worked on. And this year, it is better. It is much, much better. But it is not just Buffalo Schools that did it. It's a collective effort. We all came together. We sat in rooms. We talked about it. And it's better. It's going to continue to take all of our attention to keep it that way. And we will. We were able to implement this 3-tiered bell schedule. Huge. Monumental. Now, do we still have some things? Yes. Yes, I wish I had magic fairy dust and I could just sprinkle it and things would be better. But I do not. But I'm also not afraid of hard work. And I'm not afraid that, if I hear from parents that it's not working, I'm working with those parents to try to see what we can do to get it better. And that's the truth. Expert trainings for staff in the areas of mental health. We will continue to do that. I want our staff trained, highly trained, starting with our principals and assistant principals, but moving down to all staff in mental health awareness. We had a wonderful program at Burgard High School, and we did a lot of work there to destigmatize mental health issues. Because who of all of us has not been touched in some way, shape, or form with someone, if not our own selves, with mental health? We came out of a pandemic where we were isolated for close to 1.5 years, some 2 years, and now, numbers are upticking again. But how could we not all be affected by that? We work closely. I have made it my business to work closely with our Western New York delegation members because they bring home the bacon from Albany. So I make it my business to make sure that I keep them abreast of what's happening in Buffalo schools and what we need. And so all of this is just helping to align our messaging so that all of our partners are speaking with one voice. We have not been quiet and we have not been shy about messaging in multiple ways the good things that are happening in Buffalo schools. Someone said to me this week, why don't we focus on the good things instead of always highlighting when 1 or 2 things are bad? And I thought about that, and it caused me to pause. We highlight on billboards, on Wednesday with Williams, on our website, and everywhere I go, I'm talking about the positivity in the Buffalo public schools. And that's what I need for our entire community to do also. Because I believe that, the more we talk about it, what we put into the environment is what we're going to get. So if we put it out there, then that's what we'll get back. So I'm going to leave that there. Next slide, please. And this is the final slide. We've been sitting for a long time. So our final slide, these beautiful, precious spaces. I say that there is nothing more important than ensuring the safety and security of all of our children. And it is my hope that this presentation assures all that this Board of Education and the Buffalo Public Schools take safety incredibly serious, and that we will do all possible every single day to ensure that our schools and our office sites remain safe, secure, and supportive every day. That is my assignment as Superintendent of Buffalo Public Schools. Thank you all for listening to this presentation, and I'll take questions. Madam President?
First of all, I want to give our superintendent a round of applause. Would have brought staff in to do this presentation. By having our superintendent stand here, it is clear that she has a handle on what's going on with security in this district, and I want to thank you, and you deserve to be applauded for that. I am looking for any questions that the board may have at this point relative to this presentation. If there's something that was not listed here and you have additional questions, I would, the superintendent needs to reserve the right to follow up with that at another time. I hope you will be respectful of that. Are there any questions that we have or concerns? First up, Dr. Honorable Ann Revere.
My question has mostly to do what happens when we see emerging areas of need. So we have procedures, we have policies in place, we have a very long list of the policies that we've passed. But as you pointed out at the very end of your presentation, students' mental health needs shift. And sometimes we have some areas in the district that have more need than other. So what kind of analysis and examination do we do after an incident happens, or when we start to see a rise in a particular building, in a particular area, after school, during school? How do we change resourcing, staffing, and procedures to respond to that?
That's a great question.
She can sit down at the table right now. Thank you. Have a seat. All right, thanks.
That's a great question. I hope that the presentation shared on a pivot, we've already, whether it's swatting incidents, something we didn't even know existed last year at this time, on a pivot, we have to continuously look at best practices. I've been around long enough that there are some things that, we're looking at doing right now. Something that we used to do was, when we had newer building leaders, we would send in supports of more seasoned leaders to just come in and help with procedures. It could be dismissal, and it could be that, dismissal is a little bit challenging because there are some other ways that a seasoned leader might have had it work in their building, and they can share that with you. But we're always looking at data. I have a data team that's assembled within my cabinet. And so we look at times of day when things are happening. Fountain Plaza prior to last year, that was not an issue. But when we see that things are upticking, whether it is at certain schools, certain times of the day, in certain classrooms, then we get in and we provide support. But it's supportive, it's collective, it's not us coming in, top down and this is the way it is. It's all of us sitting around a table and letting the data really drive, what it is we're seeing. Again, looking at our long-term suspensions, we know that's another big change, that just sending students right back to school with no intervention is not something that's helpful. So when we look at the fact that we're getting students who are getting suspended over and over and over and over for kind of the same kinds of things, it's time to put a pause there, take a look at it, interrupt that cycle, and do something different. And so that's what we'll continue to do.
Just have one more and then I'll be done. So that's my present-looking question. I have a forward-looking question about, is there any interest in the district or any plans in the district to work with the board to create more supportive, different settings and more supportive environments for a wider range of needs? Because larger buildings can be more difficult for some of our students. Smaller settings, different kinds of support structures. We do have some of these. It seems that it might be worth opening that conversation. Is there any interest in that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I look forward to that.
Next is Terry Schutter and then Mr. Hurd.
First of all, thank you. And I know that it's a tough conversation as we're all trying to figure out how to keep people safe. And that was one of the main reasons why I ran for the board. I was a longtime high school principal, and I experienced a lot of these things firsthand. So the one thing, there's a couple things. Instead of being reactive, the swatting situation is very troublesome to me, because people in law enforcement who had spoken to us had said they knew this was going around the country. We have a security team and we have security experts. And why, when they knew there was something happening throughout the country, that we didn't prepare before that happened at South Park High School, the school that was in my district. So right there, preventative. And the same thing that is very disturbing to me is that we have a security team that now in spring of 2024 are going to bring gang intelligence and prevention to the Buffalo schools after what we've been through these last few years. That is not acceptable to me, and I'm just saying, as a building leader, that we, without that training, we're putting people in danger. And my third point is the effectiveness of the crisis team. I hear from different people after different incidents. I'm not sure, is there a survey that can go to schools after they've gone through traumatic things, and the follow through and the effectiveness of what we're giving to schools? I think that could make us do better.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Next, Board Member Hurd.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Superintendent, for such a great presentation. And one thing you said, that you're not afraid of hard work. So we see all the work and time that you put into devising this plan and working with this good staff. I also say that one of your best and smartest moves was to hire Chief Clark in her position, and to build those gaps between Buffalo Police, the state, and the county, and working with our security staff. So thank you. My question is,
Yes, please, what's your question? Because we have a meeting that we have to do.
my question is that I'm looking at statistics. Around this time of year to December, we get a large number of charter schools students that get reverted back to the Buffalo schools. And during that time period, these students are not categorized why they left the charter school, but a lot of them have behavior problems and they bring them to our schools. And at that time, you see a rise in our suspensions, a rise in incidents. What can we do as a district to try to work to put in more red flags or more programs, or just try to find a way to meet the needs of those charter schools? That's, I believe it was over 470 last year that came back to the district. To stop that increase of violence that happened in our schools and stop that uptick in incidents, what can we do as a district to try to plan for that?
So that's a trend that we've seen, year after year, where there are certain peaks and times that we get high numbers of students that come in. Central registration does sit with families when they come to the district and try to identify, what happened there. And, we've kind of shifted. It's not a punitive ask. It's more of an ask so that you can be successful here. Whatever happened there, for whatever the reason, things didn't happen the way that the parent wanted them to happen. So we want to be able to support. What can we do to support? And so if we find out that there are issues that the student may have at certain schools, we try not to put the student at those schools, especially if it's at the high school level where we've got larger opportunities to move children around. I think that's an area that, we will continue to work with as far as students coming in, because parents, sometimes they're honest and share what happened, and sometimes, it's difficult to get that information. I'm meeting with charter school principals in 2 weeks because, being more proactive and forward thinking, I want us to have open communication together, because we all want the same things. We all want to improve student outcomes, and we all want for our children to be safe. And so it's important that we start talking regularly about what's going on. So I'm hoping that some of that will help with some of that also. But student registration, placement and registration does work with the families to try to identify what happened. And if there was an expulsion that happened from the charter school, they will send the file to our pupil personnel office, and then the student has to go through a meeting here with one of our hearing officers to see if the district would also substantiate whatever it is that happened at the charter school before assigning the child to a school.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Board Member Makuzi and then followed by Board Member McKetchin. Thank you.
So I'm going to echo with thank you very much for all of this. I took notes and it's after 5, so I'm very interested in everything that's happening here. But my question is, since we're meeting so often with the BPD, and I know that there's been, you're made aware of the concentration of different activities that's going on in different areas. I'd like, as a board member, to be able to know, I don't need to know names, but I need to know, like, how concentrated are activities happening in and around my area, because I know it on being in the street, but I don't know what we're working with as far as, like, with the BPD, without the BPD, what BPS is doing. That activity, especially when you're hearing that it's within the schools, but it's undercover, and it's, being a community person who's out there often, any information that would help me be able to kind of navigate some of the situations that come to me. This way I can bring them to you and we can work together.
Okay.
I just like a little more information if possible. I don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The lines are drawn, but it would help a lot.
And I do try, to keep this board informed of things that rise to your level every day. Things that I become aware of, I get that information out to.
I'm just saying in general, if you have any, this is a baseline of what's going on here, I'd love to be able to know what that is. It helps me deal with our community.
Thank you. Next, Board Member McKetchin.
I want to just share in my colleagues' sentiments. Thank you for your presentation. My question is regarding timelines, right? So we shared several new preventions that the district is going to step into. A few of them do have dates associated, but I think one of my questions centers around the timeline for implementation, specifically regarding the school-based reentry process. Obviously, it's in planning. You stated that, but when is the outcome? Like, when do we anticipate rolling something out? What is that delivery due by date? And then my other question, and I'll ask both of them and then feel free to answer, however, is regarding restorative justice. And I'm happy to hear, right, the kind of public declaration that we are a restorative justice district. That is wonderful. And I appreciate that it is a slow process of moving into that space, but, it's in the presentation that we started this almost 7 years ago, right? So it's been years, and I know COVID was a block of that, and that is totally recognized and justified and understood. But again, when we talk about timeline, what is our specific approach for growing and moving in this space? And when do we think we will be able to kind of maneuver into that next phase? I heard it's getting better, which is wonderful, but for me, I need more. What does that mean? Yeah. Are we looking at, certain number of schools, and by a particular period of time, 100% of the schools? And what is that timeline that we're going to start, implementing and bringing this into the schools?
Yeah. So the reason I didn't put a timeline on that piece is because we're always hiring new staff. And so we may get a school trained, and then, they transfer to different schools. There's a lot of transiency that happens in the district. But what I can assure you is that all of our principals were trained. Now, not this year's principals that are newly hired, but, prior to this year. But I can certainly share with you a rollout process for, what restorative justice looks like at this point, which schools have what percentage, because we track all of that information in our professional growth system. So anytime staff participate in PD, we can pull reports and see for school 3, how many of the staff have been trained in this mechanism. So I can get that information for you. And the first question, I'm sorry, the rollout for?
The example that I offered was like a school-based reentry process.
That's big. That's going to be a big one. And so, it's going to require us to start with the training of principals and then asking principals to identify who in their buildings will be on those teams. Will it be the counselor, social worker? I mean, sometimes that makes sense, and sometimes you have a teacher, aide, or assistant in a building that really has their finger to the pulse on what's going on. They know the families and all of that. And so once they are able to identify who their team will be, then we got to do trainings for the team. And what will that look like? Will that look like us pulling them out or doing a Saturday training or a Zoom training? So, I understand that everything is urgent. Everything is urgent. And, but we want to get it right. I don't want to do it haphazardly. What I can say, though, is that we will at least be able to roll something out to our principals by December. That's a start.
Yeah, that's helpful, because I think that we don't want to be reactive by any means, but we're seeing every day.
I know.
Even as evidenced by today, right? We're seeing every day continuation. So there is a sense of urgency to a level to be able to say, by this date, we hope to implement something, and it needs to be that focus.
Agreed.
Any other board members?
So,
Our student leader, board member Mills.
So like, I don't know how to be like professional about it, but I'm gonna try to say it like best way I can possibly.
You just say it however you want to say it.
Right. So I was wondering, with the new long-term suspension, right? I was wondering which way can the action be different without creating bias from the school? Because there are biases from different principals and teachers that could come with the student getting long-term suspension. It depends on like what they do, of course, but there are sorts of teachers that start to treat them more differently than other students, which I guess you could say are with precautions because of their actions. But how can we ensure for the student to have greatness or to have a second chance to become great for our school?
Look at Dr. Mills. I'm so proud of you. My goodness, I'm giving you a round of applause.
Student leadership in the house.
And your boots on the ground, because, this is what you see, every day in your schools. So right now, the way that we've already changed it a little bit and taken some of that subjectivity out of, you've rolled your eyes at me, and now you've got a long-term suspension, and yet our board president rolled her eyes at someone in another school, and she didn't even get suspended, Well, not at this table, somewhere. I mean, maybe at a table, but not this table. But, and that is that when a principal sends in information for a long-term suspension, it's a recommendation. It's a recommendation. It's not that you are suspended. We have a person that looks at every single charge that comes to his office to see, when he looks at that charge and he looks at the code of conduct, is this a level 4 infraction? What exactly did this child do that is what the board approved, that code of conduct is a level 4 infraction? If it does not meet a level 4 infraction, but it really says a parent conference should happen for this level, then it's sent back to the school. And so, and that does happen. That happens regularly. And I know that because I hear from principals. Sometimes they didn't know, sometimes, for whatever the reason. But there is someone that is watching that information to make sure that no infractions are sent and acted upon as a long-term suspension. So when students get suspended, what they get is a short-term suspension letter, and it'll say that if it's deemed that a longer-term suspension is happening, then there's something that comes out from my office for the long-term suspension. But there are times that it gets turned back because it doesn't meet that level of a long-term suspension.
So, to continue with that, if there is a student who does get that long-term suspension, with implementing them inside the same school, how would that change their way? And I know they have to get reevaluated to go back inside the school. What ways do you think that would change the students' behavior? Or might, instead of moving them to a new school in a new environment, for them to be in a different environment?
Right. So I was a hearing officer for a long time, and by law, you can't give a student double jeopardy, meaning that they get suspended from school and you're moving them. That's two things. So you can't do that by law. But I think having this reentry process is a start, because the student, before coming back and just signing into the book and going up to class, business as usual, they have to sit down with the team. And depending on what the infraction was, and was this your first time or was this your 10th time that you've done this, you know, they come up with a plan, they talk about, and, you know, they have to be able to help our young people learn new skills, new ways to respond to situations. And then there has to be support to make sure, because, you know, all of us are creatures of habit. And so when something happens, we just go right back to what we know works for us or what we've always done. So there has to be support also that's provided. So we don't just sit and say, well, you know, if Dr. Williams rolls her eyes at you, you know, it's not a good idea to get up and punch her. You know, there are other ways that you can, you know, resolve it. And, you know, you can always come to me in room 110 when you start to feel that anger rising, so that we can get it resolved positively. So, you know, there has to be support. So your teachers know, I need to go to room 110 because I'm starting to feel that anger rising. So that's why it's not easy for me to just, it's a whole systemic change that's going to happen in each building in order for the plan to be implemented the way that it needs to be.
So essentially, it would be like how people that have like mental health, like have anxiety and anxiousness, are able to have that time to go sit with the student psychiatrist. I don't remember. I know there's a group specifically in my school. I do not remember.
SST, just
SST.
yes.
There we go. SST. Or go down to guidance counselor and like talk about their problems. Is that a possibility?
Oh yes, that's exactly what it is. It could be though that you have a great relationship with the teacher aide in a building, or you know, the cafeteria manager may be your aunt, and maybe that's the person that you talk to. Maybe you come and help the clerk, you know, every day at the end of the day, and that's who your relationship is established with. So, you know, it won't be necessarily SST. It could be. People think that because they're trained licensed therapists, you know, counselors, social workers, and psychologists, but it could be someone else that you say, you know, they're going to ask the student, who do you have a good relationship with in the building? Maybe it's your coach that you have a good relationship with. So it'll depend.
Okay.
Very good questions.
I have a follow-up to that, just because I feel like there are situations, and more than we like to admit, where a student, no matter who they talk to, if they're a staff person in that building, if the issue with the student is actually the teacher or the principal, then you can't really go to someone and you're kind of stuck. So if you're, you know, as a student, we have in the code of conduct that they have their rights and they can call for a restorative, you know, conference or circle. But I feel that we don't, in this just conversation alone, it wasn't mentioned that they have the right to call their own. So I feel that that needs to be advocated for more, that the students have rights as well. And this should be very clear to the student that you can't just do what you want to do and then say you want to have a conference because you don't like the outcome. This is for the student who is actually dealing with a teacher who maybe who might have an issue with them, or the principal themselves, or they had an infraction because they had a bad day, had an anxious issue, and was suspended because the principal had a bad day. Like, the student, to me, it needs to be just as clear that they're advocated for and they're protected when they feel like it's the authority figures who are really the problem. Because I'm hearing that, you know, they can go to this person, they can go to that person, this is their first time or their 10th time. What if they're just reacting to what's happening to them? So I'm not saying this is the commonplace, but I am saying it happens more than enough that we have our students who are dealing with, you know, issues, and then they're dropping out or they're acting out, and they're the issue when actually it was the authority figure. And they can't go to the cafeteria person because they're not going to, you know, report to the authority figure. So I just feel like the supports that we need to have in these restorative circles, if we're truly doing this the way that we, you know, we know we want to, is that everybody has the right to be able to express what's happening in their situation.
So that's one of our 5 by 2025 and activating student voice. You know, that's very important. So I agree with you that, you know, students do have rights. Most of the time when students do something that merits a longer term suspension or short, it is reactionary. Most all of the time it is reactionary, but something that I used to say to my students all the time, and it still holds true today, as a student, you know, if you have an issue with an adult, whether it's at the gas station, if it's at school, if it's at your job, you know, to tell another adult and let the adults handle it at that level, because as a child, you know, you yelling, cursing, screaming, and all of that's not going to merit something good. So find an adult that you trust, whether it's in the school, whether it's your parent, whoever it is, and then let the adults work through whatever the issues, you know,
And
the
that's
issues.
what I'm asking, is that we repeat these things, and we say these things, because we don't say that as often as we say, this is what the student did, so this is what we're going to do to the student. We should be, you know, I don't like saying should, but I would like to see us talk about the avenues for the student as well.
Okay.
I have a comment.
Yes, Vice President.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, for a detailed presentation on safety and security in our schools. I think we do a lot of professional development, and I've always liked, you know, this area of the circles. I remember 10 years ago, I actually worked in the classroom, and that was so critical to the group I had. Very challenging group of children, but they look forward to restorative justice. And I think we did it we were doing it twice a week, but they wanted more. So we were doing it every day. I saw the change, you know, within, you know, the students and taking ownership and accountability for, you know, their behaviors. And so I'm saying all that to say, it's similar to what Cindy mentioned and Jen and you. It's an evidence-based practice that does work, and it takes time. You're not going to see results overnight. And I like the fact that you're going to give us the schools that really, truly, I know 43 a couple of years ago, Lovejoy was doing it the way it's supposed to be done. And so I think if more teachers, more staff get the buy-in that it work, I think we can, you know, see some differences, you know, in our schools. So I'm looking forward to the schools that are really, truly practicing it, and we need to do more with schools who aren't doing it.
So I'd just like to say, I think we need to talk now about next steps as far as where we're going to go, and maybe with our committees, some of the things that might report out under educational support. But I think there's a factor in here that we need to address, because for whatever reason, in my opinion, there's a factor here that we need to address, and it is the parent caretaker factor. Okay, we are not ever going to be able to correct this without getting the parents of the children involved. Okay, my mother taught me, when there's trouble, you run the other way. Therefore, you never would have seen any of her children in a group of kids that were acting out, because my mom didn't play that. Okay, what we have to do now is start talking about, as a board, since we represent parents and students, what does that look like? Because we cannot continue not to put that factor in. Today, for example, a child had an incident. Parent refused to come to the school to pick the child up. The police had to take the child home. Okay, to me, that's a red flag. Okay, there's something going on in that home that needs additional support. Is it support that we can provide, or is it support that other agencies need to provide? But I don't think that it's okay if your child is having a meltdown or a problem, that as a parent, you can say, no, I'm not dealing with this. I have principals that tell me that when their children are misbehaving, they call the parents are telling them, you deal with them till 3 o'clock, I'll deal with them after that. We have to start as a board moving forward to what a policy and procedures would look like when our children are acting out and need additional support. That is the only way, in my opinion, that we're ever going to get a handle on this. If a parent is responsible or required to come to school or go to a hearing and explain why their child was able to do the things they're doing or whatever, I think we can get some support for the parent. We're not trying to be punitive at all. That's not what I'm about. I'm about assisting people and moving them to the next level. But we have to start talking about what factor is missing in this equation that can help us get these children to the next level. And the reason I feel it's important is because no one hesitates to talk about the school to prison pipeline. We get them for 7 hours and we're sending them to prison, okay? So what happens the rest of the time? Okay, how does that child come to school acting the way they're acting without additional supports to make sure that something is not happening outside of this school building that's pushing that child to the next level? So I want you guys to think about that. I think I'm really thinking, and we'll see what committee we're going to put it under, but I have some ideas. I think that Dr. Williams, maybe some of the children who have been acting out, who have been suspended the most, maybe, or who are on, on that track to be suspended, maybe we can start thinking about maybe a pilot program where we provide resources. We brought kids escaping drugs in, we brought all sorts of MVP in, who's dealing with the parents. Maybe we can talk about what a pilot program of trying to move children to the next level who are having difficulty in the educational setting might look like. Okay, I think, we have enough intellect at this table, experience to start having that conversation, because we cannot continue to ignore the fact that we are, as a school district, required to protect our schools, and then when they get outside of the building, we're having problems that are coming back into our schools or causing impact around our schools. And I think it goes back to the caretaker and parenting factor, okay? Because if you are allowing your child to conduct themselves like that, what role are you putting your child on? Okay, we can only do so much. So and the other part to that is, I would like to see the city also partner with us and provide additional resources, because these are their constituents. Okay, yes, we educate them, and we're a social service agency. We provide dental, we provide emotional help, we provide legal, we provide social emotional support, we provide food, we provide clothing. We have turned into, and rightfully so, we're going to do what we have to do for our babies, but we need to make sure that monies are being allotted, okay? And this mental health money that's just being given to providers and not being given to grassroots people, I think we're on the wrong path with that, because you're not going to fix this community, you're not going to fix this city without getting the citizens involved in it. You're just not. People cannot come from outside of Buffalo and fix it and go back to the suburbs at the end of the day. It's not working. We see it. So we'll have more conversations, but I think it was important to have this meeting because for whatever reason, there's a misunderstanding that things are not being done in a way that will equal results. Now, we don't have a perfect system, but part of that not having a perfect system is we don't have all players at the table. We don't. And one of the things that I also think we should talk about is we need to talk about this bail reform. What the cops are doing, bringing kids to school that have violated the law, saying that they don't have a place to take the kids. How is it that you get a kid in a situation where they are violating the law and you bring them to Buffalo Public Schools? Who's doing that? Why wouldn't you take the child to a place where the child could receive services or that the parents could come and pick up the child? So we have a lot of work to do in this area, and I'm looking forward for us to do it. But at this point, we're over 15 minutes, so I think if anyone has any other additional questions, we'll go ahead and end this meeting. Well, actually, I planned I planned it to go to 5:30. That's what it, if you look at my original email to you, it was from 4 to 5:30. Someone did not change that, but that's what it was, okay? Because I knew that this conversation would take more than an hour to do. But we, I think we'll have more conversations in our committees as we move forward.
Can I just add to your
Yes.
point that we can train people in restorative justice, restorative practices till we're blue in the face. We can expect it till we're blue in the face. But to your point, if a student or a parent or a meaningful adult does not buy into it, it's voluntary. You have to be willing to participate in it. You have to be willing to take accountability. And if you don't, then it's not going to be effective. We can't just say, do restorative justice, get all people involved. If the victim's uncomfortable with participating in it, you can't go further with it. So I think people need to understand that restorative justice, although it can be very effective, I've run circles, restorative conferences, it has its limitations. And we need parents and students, as parents especially, to buy into that process and be accountable.
Well, I think we need to give them some incentives for buying in. How's that? No, because seriously, okay, if we're doing the best that we can do, you're going to have to help us get to the next level. And if you're not interested in getting your child to the next level, then maybe there's additional needs that need to be, and we may not be able to provide it for you. After all, we're not like the charter schools. We can't cherry pick.
Nope.
We can't just send every kid back to the Buffalo public schools we don't want. Okay, that's what's happening when they send the kids back. That's called cherry picking. And it's happening on a daily basis. They're not conforming. They're not doing what we want them to do. They're not worthy to be in our school. We need to work also with the state legislators to get a law in there that says that if it's disciplinary issues and you're getting the federal money just like Buffalo Public Schools, you should have something set up to help children that are having challenges. That's not the law right now. So we have some work to do, and we'll do it. We're not afraid. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. With that said, this special meeting is adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you for your attendance.
For my staff, senior staff, you're released.
Thank you.
Okay? You can log on. Just call in. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so who's up next? Who?
Finance.
Finance.
That was a great one.
Wow, I'm impressed with you.
Tell me again which one you go to.
Yeah, I go to
7:30.
Now, you missed it. It's on. Okay. So
I'm Cindy.
Those ones, those definitely tomorrow.
they'll be phasing in. They'll come in. You can go ahead and get started.
Okay. Welcome to the Finance and Operations Committee Board Workshop. Today we're going to have a presentation from our Chief Financial Officer on our 2022-23 audit results. I just want to say, I want to commend Mr. Barnes and his staff. We're facing some excellent challenges, difficult challenges this year, but they're going to report on the excellent results that we have with them managing our expenses, increasing our revenues, with staff turnover. Our chief fiscal officer is new. A majority of our staff is new, but I want you to know they have done an excellent job in some very difficult circumstances, managed some capital projects, opened some new buildings, and I'm just so proud of you, and I want to thank you for all the extra hard work you've done. So I would turn it over to the superintendent to give some remarks, but since she is not here, I will turn it over to our chief fiscal officer to recognize the staff and to do his presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Woods. And we have our external auditors, Lumsden McCormick on. I'm going to give a very brief presentation and turn it over to them. The main objective tonight is to have our external auditors present their report on the audit of the district's books and records, accounting systems and procedures, and to verify our financial reports for the year ending June 30th, 2023. As you'll soon hear, we had a really great financial year in 2023. The district is in excellent financial condition as measured by the fund balance at June 30th. But also, as your CFO, it's my responsibility to identify and project out potential financial risks or problems that are facing the district. And I'm going to do that tonight on the last slide of my presentation. However, if that is not the main purpose of tonight's meetings, there will be plenty of follow-up meetings on these risks and challenges. Before we started, I wish there were more board members here. I got to say it. I wanted to take a few minutes and celebrate the great results and successful audit, but also to introduce and to say thank you to several of the key members of our finance team. This is a very large and complex organization financially, and without these guys' efforts and their expertise, this district would be in bad shape. So, Department. Andrew Onigi is the controller for the district. He is the chief accountant for the district. And he started with me in our roles last year and has done a phenomenal job. Chuck Salvamosa really has stepped up and taken over the budget process. Kim German is the head of our charter school department. She handles the enrollment for 10,000 students. Then you have Jennifer Latempio, our next director of purchasing. Again, Jennifer, much like payroll, they take a lot of knocks. Jennifer purchases over $400 million in goods and services, issues 8,900 recs and POs, and deals with 1,700 vendors. So these are all key people, and there's more that are not here tonight, but we'll get around to introducing them later. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So I'm going to get right into my presentation. Admir, next slide, please. So the 22-23 general fund audited financial results. We ended the year with a surplus of $50.9 million. The original budget was deficit was $34.6 million. That was the board approved budget. We did a projected, we do projections at the end of every quarter. At the end of the third quarter, we thought we'd have a $3.6 million deficit, and we ended the year with a surplus of $50.9 million. The next table at the bottom, our revenues, our general fund revenues crossed the $1 billion mark last year, and that was $69.6 million more than the prior year. The actual surplus increased by $39 million. Our total general fund balance, the key measure of a district's financial health just through the general fund, is at June 30th, $375.5 million. Extremely good financial results, and we're in great financial health at the end of June 30th. Next slide, Edna. Now, I just mentioned that our general fund reserve was $375 million. That does not mean that we can just casually use that money for any purposes. Lumsden and McCormick will discuss this slide and their version of it in a little bit, but a couple of things I want to point out. If you go down to the bottom of the green, that's the total general fund balance, right? $375 million. The number above it, $151 million, that's the amount of what we call our rainy day fund. That's the amount of the 375 that is not committed, already committed to other uses. Lumsden and McCormick will discuss this in a little bit more, but I wanted to make that point. And the third thing I'd like to make on this slide is a couple of lines under the 375 million. Right now, compared to our 4-year plan, we're running $54.5 million ahead of that 4-year plan in fund balance.
So what does that mean?
That means we're doing better than planned as of June 30th.
We're in the best financial condition we've ever been.
Yes.
We need a commissary next. Keep going.
The next slide, please, Admir. A quick look at 22-23 results versus budget. I want to stress again to this group that we had a tremendously successful financial year in 22-23, even while navigating numerous large financial issues such as the BTF contract and funding unaidable capital projects. A quick look at some of the revenue numbers versus budget. It's the first time in a long time we're saying our total revenues are greater than our budget by $23.8 million. Total state aid was $4.5 million greater than budget. Sales tax was $11 million. Invoicing to other districts was $2.9 million greater than budget. Medicaid reimbursements were $1 million greater than budget. And lastly, our interfund revenues due to the ARPS indirect revenues was $3.9 million greater than budget. So in a lot of years when we've had surpluses, revenues were actually less than budget, but our spending was that much less. This year we put a lot of time and a lot of effort into the revenue side, and it's paid off. On the expenditure side, some favorable variances. Total expenditures were $62.1 million under the revised budget. Transportation was $4.4 million less. $32.3 million. Salaries were less due to vacancies, but not all vacancies. About $18 million of that was vacancies. The rest of it was we shifted the funding for the BTF retro and the BTF bonus to the ARP fund. Benefits were $9.9 million less than budget. Again, due to vacancies, but also the shift of the bonus, the benefits on the bonus and retro payment. $3.8 million. Tuitions from other agencies and districts were less. Offsetting these positive variances, we transferred $17 million in unbudgeted requests for capital projects. I want to note again that these results were impacted by the decision to use $48 million in ARP funds to fund the BTF retro and the 10% bonus. So, next slide, Edna. So again, a phenomenal 22-23, a $50 million surplus, a $374 million general fund, $151 million rainy day fund within there. We are in the strongest position in a long time, if not ever. However, as your CFO, it's my job to also proactively identify upcoming financial risks and their potential impact on our cash flow. And I'm going to do that on this slide. The 23-24 approved budget calls for a $37.7 million deficit. I would, at this point, I can't do a full projection until the November board meeting. It's quite an elaborate calculation, and I need a lot more payrolls to do that. But this is not going to be where a large deficit turns into a surplus this year. I'll give you some reasons. The full impact of the second year of the BTF on salaries, extra activities, and benefits. In extra activity with the new pay rates and the 1/200th charge, we spent $10 million in 3 months. Fewer vacancies, thus higher wages and benefits than in the past year. There's going to be fewer vacancies this year. We've added maybe about 200 people. Depending on the timing, we may have to make additional transfers to capital that were not budgeted. There's a pending $6 million WAS Ed purchase that was not budgeted. So these factors will be more fully discussed and outlined in our upcoming first quarter report, along with the quarterly reports I provide a projection for the remainder of the year. Just on my gut feel and an understanding of the factors I just mentioned, I don't expect that original deficit to turn into a surplus this year. So, 3 of the biggest risks or factors to consider going forward. Our BESSER ends June 30th, 2024. This impacts about $90 million in funding, including approximately 310 FTEs, summer school and after-school program. The $90 million cannot fit into the general fund. If reductions are not made or additional revenues identified, it will quickly deplete that wonderful district fund balance that we just described, and it will result in severe cash flow problems impacting the district's ability to cover even its basic operating expenditures. Now, let's just assume worst case, we do nothing. Remember I mentioned there's a $150 million rainy day fund? If we just continue on with the $90 million, we run out of cash in 18 months. So that has to be addressed. There's continued decreases in enrollment that's going to negatively impact our foundation aid. Got to remember, now it's full formula based. As your kids go down, your revenues go down. We need to right size our building staff to our enrollments. The last risk that I clearly see is during the last 2 fiscal years, we've transferred $27 million to capital projects. There is an additional $22 million currently being discussed that will bring the projected total of transfers to capital to $49 million over a 3-year period. This will have a negative impact on the district's ability to utilize our fund balance to cover our BESSER expenditures. We simply can't continue to fund unaidable capital projects and maintain a healthy fund balance. We have a lot of meetings on these risks. I thought it an opportune time to point them out. We are in our strongest financial position ever, but we're facing some very serious challenges. With that, I'll turn it back to Mrs. Woods, and we have our auditors waiting, and they're going to give their report. Thank you.
Our superintendent isn't here, so we can call on the audit. Well, let's ask, is there any questions first? Any questions on this part of the presentation? If not, then can we call up our auditors?
No, the auditors are on. They're going to do it virtually.
They're going to do it virtually? Okay.
They're online.
Okay, we have Sarah Dayton and Jenna Sheehan from Lumsden and McCormick.
Hello.
And could you pull up the next presentation? Can you hear us, Jenna? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. I'm going to get the other one up soon.
Thanks, Ed.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the next one.
Perfect. Okay, as Jim said, I am Sarah Dayton from Lumsden McCormick, and with me is Jenna Sheehan. We'll present a summary of your financial statements because they're about 55 pages, and I assume you don't want to be here all night. So we'll go through the generalities. Please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. I think you'll actually see quite a few similarities between some of the things Jim already touched on. We can move to the next page, please. So our deliverables to you, the main reason you hire us is to render an opinion on the district's financial statements. So for June 30th, 2023, we are issuing an unmodified opinion. That is a clean opinion, meaning that your financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So that's what you're hoping for, is that clean opinion. There's also 2 other opinions included within the financial statements. One in accordance with government auditing standards, and we had no matters under those standards, and one in accordance with the uniform guidance. So because you receive federal funding in excess of $750,000, you're required to have what's called a single audit specific to your federal funding. So for 2023, you had almost $251 million in federal funding that you received, up from $130 million the year before. Almost that entire increase is those education stabilization funds, or ARPA funds. You're deemed to be a low-risk auditee because you haven't had findings under the single audit in the past 2 years. It's a 2-year period, because you have had a clean audit. So technically, we're only required to test 20% of those funds. However, there's also requirements on the frequency with which we test certain grants. And so therefore, we had to test basically all of the ARP funding, Title I, and special education, which accounted for 82% of your federal funding. We are just finishing up that testing now. We should be done in the next day or 2. That's obviously a very large piece of the audit. And as of now, we have no findings and no question costs as a result of that testing. Once that testing is complete and once the financial statements are approved, we will also file a data collection form with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. We help prepare it, and then management certifies it. It just details all of those federal grant funds. That form and your financial statements then become publicly available on that federal website, as does any entity who has federal funding in excess of $750,000. So that's really the last piece. We also issue a schedule of additions and deductions relative to your extra classroom activity. That's all of the student clubs. So that's a separate report detailed by school, in your case, showing the amounts going in and out each year. At the end of the year, you had about $1.1 million sitting in those clubs, and you had about $1.2 million going in and out during the year. So that's from fundraising and then student expenditures on those club activities. You also have a contract for excellence agreed upon procedures report based on certain expenditures for those contracts for excellence targets and educational needs, and we had no findings relative to that, so that is a clean report as well. And then I'll go through right now. 2 letters were required to issue, a communications with those charged with governance and a management letter, so those start on the next page. The required communications are required by our auditing standards to be presented to you. And if we had significant issues during the audit, they would be addressed here or on the next page. So I'm going to just go through the major points within this. The significant accounting policies, estimates, and disclosures. The point of this is to just explain that not every number within the financial statements is exact. So certain numbers we can tie directly to. We know exactly what your state aid is. We can tie that to state aid confirmations. We know what your cash is by looking at your bank balances and your reconciling items. But other items aren't as exact. As an example, your capital assets, which is your land, buildings, and equipment, You estimate the useful lives of all of those assets and then the term over which you depreciate them. Self-insured health insurance and workers' comp, you estimate claims liabilities that should be accrued as of year end for open claims that existed as of the end of that year. Compensated absences is an estimate of your accumulated sick and vacation time balances of your employees as of year end. Pensions are the two New York State pension systems, the teacher's retirement system and the employee's retirement system. The state hires actuaries to calculate what the entire pension liability is, as well as what your specific share of that liability is for the district. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. I think you're well aware of this one. This is the estimate of post-employment benefits, so your employees and what benefits they earn at retirement for health insurance. Again, an actuarial calculation. In this case, it's your actuary that you hire who performs those calculations. Leases, that was with the inception of a new accounting pronouncement last year, including certain leases and which ones qualified for presentation on your balance sheet. And then reserves, as Jim went over, and we have a couple slides on them as well, and what's deemed to be necessary for the district to include in its reserves at year end. I'd also like to mention, last year we had discussed implementation of a new governmental accounting standard, GASB 96, on subscription-based information technology arrangements, which is basically accounting for leases, but for software agreements. Technically, that standard was implemented for June 30th, 2023. Fortunately, the district's software subscriptions, none of them meet the requirements to be accounted for under the new method under GASB 96, so they are just accounted for as they always were, and you expense those costs each month or year as you pay them. So no change, although it was implemented. Then there's significant disclosures in your financial statements. So if you were to spend time on certain disclosures, we would tell you that the most important ones really relate to the liabilities of the district. So we would say note 5, which is all of your long-term liabilities. So this would be your bonds, some of your long-term accruals, your compensated absences. Note 6, which is all of the disclosures relative to those state pension plans, and note 7 relative to the actuarial assumptions and values for your other post-employment benefits. The other main thing I would like to point out on this page is under difficulties encountered during the audit. We did have a comment here last year just because of the transition in staffing right at year end with Jeff and Julie and others leaving. So we were able to take that point out this year because we did not have those delays. So that was a significant improvement over last year. So I just wanted to point that out to you. The only other things I'll mention is that all adjustments were reviewed with management and they were agreed to and corrected. And the only open item is representations from management. Management signs a letter that they've disclosed everything to us. We don't send that until we've received all final pieces of audit evidence. That includes legal letters from both your in-house counsel and certain third-party attorneys. We actually just got those today, so we'll be sending this representation letter as soon as we finalize the last pieces of that federal testing. Nothing else of note in this report. So moving on to the next page is your management letter. I think the most important thing to take away from this report is that this is where we disclose any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that we find in your internal controls. And we didn't find either of those. So you will say that you will see in the letter that it says there are no material weaknesses in your internal controls. And again, we didn't disclose or find any significant deficiencies. So the comments we have here are truly just comments and observations versus things that we believe to be significantly deficient. So the first is accounting for grants in the special aid fund. These are all detailed further within the management letter, so I'll go through them pretty generally, and we can discuss in more detail if you'd like. Basically, just ensuring that your grant revenue is equal to your grant expenditures. Anytime you receive a grant, if you don't spend it all, you have to pay it back. Or if you don't spend it all within that given year, you defer that revenue and recognize it in the subsequent year when you finish spending it. So just ensuring that that is adjusted as of year end so that those two balances equal at any time. Typically, that special aid fund should have fund balance of 0 because those revenues should equal those expenditures. We noted excess fund balance in your food service or school lunch fund. This is a carryover comment from last year. You've already dealt with this the first time. You have an approved plan in place with the state. They don't want to see fund balance in the food service fund in excess of 3 months expenditures. However, because of the COVID funding, we audit 32 school districts, including your district. Every single one of them but one has this comment because everyone was overfunded with the COVID funding. There's certain things that you're allowed to use that for. You detailed them in your plan. We just recommend updating the plan. Some of the things that you are doing, including the commissary, weren't done by June 30th and won't be done by June 30th, 2024. So we just recommend updating that plan and the timeline within that plan for the state. We had some recommendations relative to your extra classroom activity accounts. Again, those are the student clubs. So the central treasurers keep records and then the student treasurers keep records as well. And as you can imagine, they don't always agree to the central treasurer's records. They don't necessarily keep all receipts or supporting documentation. And so that tends to happen relatively frequently with the districts that we audit. So we're just including it here as a reminder to have the students include those details that students should be involved in all of the clubs and they should be keeping that documentation and reconciling that to district's records. And then the final comment, this is a carry forward comment, but there's been no change, so we kept it in our current comments, is on the interest allocation to reserves. So we'll go through fund balance in a couple of slides, and Jim just went through it as well. There's certain reserve funds that you as a district have decided to keep in accordance with general municipal law or education law. And within those laws, it requires that any interest earned on those funds be allocated to the reserves. Because much of your money is held by the city, you're not actually receiving interest on most of that money. I think you received about $68,000 of interest allocated to those per year. But we
only.
Pardon?
Only off of 240,000. That's all we get interest on.
Right. So we would recommend continuing to determine whether more of that interest can be allocated to the district, especially as interest rates rise, and that would be a larger revenue stream to add to those reserves. As far as an update of prior year comments, we had recommended last year with the turnover in the business office, cross-training some employees so that others, if someone's on vacation or obviously if someone leaves, someone else would be able to fill that spot or perform some of those duties. So we continue to recommend that now as people have been in those positions for a longer period of time, perhaps having the opportunity to do that cross-training so that others know how to perform those duties. And then review of vendors. As you can imagine, a vendor list over time gets duplicate vendors, vendors who haven't been used in years, vendors that probably have gone out of business. So we continue to remind you as time allows to review that vendor listing and clean it up. That tends to be a fraud control, just to have an approved and condensed vendor listing to help ensure you're paying proper third parties. Then the final point in the management letter is on 2 new accounting pronouncements. We mentioned both of these last year as well. GASB 100 is effective for your current fiscal year, ended June 30, 2024. This is just how you're required to disclose and reflect different changes, either because of changes in estimates, error corrections, or certain other items within your financial statements. We don't expect that to have an impact on the district of any significance. Same with GASB 101 on compensated absences. Again, this is your accumulated sick and vacation time. You have accrued this liability for years on your government-wide statement. It'll be effective for 2025. It just standardizes how that's calculated amongst all governmental entities to ensure it's just more consistent from entity to entity. Again, don't expect a major impact from that either. Moving on, I will go through fund balance and then hand it over to Jenna to go through the rest of the numbers. This first fund balance page is just the general fund, and it's actually very similar to Jim's slide, showing the breakout between non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and unassigned fund balance. As a reminder, restricted fund balance are amounts restricted by either general municipal law or education law. So those are your actual reserves that the state allows you to specifically restrict those funds. Assigned fund balance is board assignment. So as a board and with management, you have agreed to assign these amounts for specific purposes. I think Jim went through most of this. You can see there was a bit of an increase in the capital projects and repair reserve. There was a reduction in school budget equity, basically because those amounts are now budgeted. That had to do with the transition to breaking out certain demographic and financial information by building. The ARP kind of assignment, as Jim mentioned, is still at 30 million. The amount designated to reduce the subsequent year's budget was increased to 37.7 million. And then unassigned fund balance is the amount by difference that Jim mentioned. Again, a very strong year. So you had that increase in the general fund balance of just under $51 million. Most of that sits in unassigned fund balance, and that was due to, which Jim mentioned as well, revenue in excess of budget as well as expenditures below budget. So on both sides of the budget, you had positive results, and Jenna will go through specifically the general fund's revenue and expenditures in 2 slides. If we switch to the next slide, that is fund balance in the remainder of your funds. So general fund is at the top. We just went through that. Special aid, as I mentioned a few slides ago, your revenues should always equal your expenditures in that grant funding. But you did have $267 million worth of grants going through that fund. So you see 0, but there was revenue and expenditures of $267 million. $215 million of that was federal grants. The remainder was primarily state and then a couple million of local grants. So 267 million as compared to 138 million in the prior year. Again, that ARP funding was really used during 2023, even more of it, as Jim was mentioning. Obviously, as that goes away, that will cause a shift in expenses back to the general fund. The capital projects fund balance increased. That is really just timing of project expenditures. You had transfers in from debt service as required, as well as transfers from the general fund of about 17 million for those projects, and about 16.3 million was spent as of June 30th. So you had about 26 million sitting in fund balance to be spent for projects as of year end. The debt service fund, that increase is really interest earnings on cash in that fund. However, you did have almost $90 million transferred in and then from the general fund and then used to pay your principal and interest debt service on most of your bond payments out of that fund. Food service is your school lunch fund. I mentioned that fund balance being in excess of the state's calculation, and that you plan to use that again for the commissary as well as staffing and certain other equipment and other expenses. And then special activities and permanent funds include just miscellaneous sources, some refunds and some endowment funds. No major activity, as you can see, in either of those funds during the year. So when you look at fund balance across all funds, you can see an increase of about $67 million year to year, the majority of which came from the net income from the general fund. With that, I will turn it to Jenna for the final slides.
Thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, a lot of the items that we will talk about right now, Jim has briefly touched on, so we'll go through some of the revenue expense, looking at some of the significant variances year over year. Starting with your contributions from the city that remained consistent for the last 3 years, that's really made up of property taxes and your STAR reimbursements. The sales tax number, that's up about $2.9 million from 2022, really as a result of the continued countywide recovery from COVID, as well as just an increase in overall dollar value of purchases countywide. Looking at your state aid, that increased just about $55 million from 2022, mainly as a result of a $31 million increase in general aid, and that is due to the phase-in of foundation aid over a period of 3 years, as well as an increase in transportation aid of about $16 million. That aid is based on your prior year expenditure. So last year you saw an increase of about $18 million in allowable transportation expenditure, so really driving that increase in the aid in 2023. Your other revenue increased about $12 million. As Jim mentioned, some of that is your interfund revenue, so an increase of about $8 million there from 2022, again, mainly due to your special aid fund indirect costs, due to those increases in ARP funds. So you'll see that increase in revenue here corresponds to the increase in activity in your special aid fund. Also in other is about $1.5 million of E-rate money. So if we go to the next slide, we'll touch on general fund expenses. So overall, your salaries are up about $6.9 million, mainly due to increases in steps as well as some contract settlements that happened during the year. The portion of salaries that you're not seeing here is that significant $48 million of the BTF contract settlement, the bonus, the retro pay, because that's sitting in your special aid fund. So that was picked up using ARP funds. So only a small increase compared to that $48 million that's sitting in your special aid fund. Overall, your employee benefits increased about $2.5 million from last year, mainly driven by increases in health insurance. So just some additional claims in the current year compared to the number of claims that happened during 2022. ERS and TRS, so your state retirement system, those both saw decreases in the current year. ERS, the decrease is consistent with the overall decrease in rates, but TRS, although the rates went up, the expense actually went down in the current year. And again, that is related to the expenses that are being picked up in the special aid fund. And then the charter school payments, you have an increase of about 301 FTEs from 2022, as well as an increase in tuition rates. So that is really driving that $7 million increase. And then finally, looking at contractual and other, that's up about $10.5 million from 2022. What's in there is your debt service payments. Those remained relatively consistent. There was no new debt issued during 2023. The main driver here is your contractual expenses. Those were up about $10.4 million. A couple factors in there: transportation, a $2.7 million increase there, really just based on contractual rates per bus. So there was an increase in 2023. There was a $1.5 million building condition survey that was completed. That's required to be completed every 5 years. So that did occur during 2023. An additional $2 million for the Say Yes program. So that included community schools, parent centers, as well as adult education services. And then $3.7 million related to some contractual work with custodians and engineers. There was a partial remote year in 2022. They were fully in person during 2023, so really just driving up that expense in the current year. Then if we go to the next slide, what you'll see on this slide is really just a reconciliation of your governmental funds to your government-wide. So we'll really focus mainly on the top, looking at some of the more significant changes year over year and what makes those up. So looking at your current assets, those increased about 116 million, mainly due to an increase in the cash held by the city of about 72 million, as well as an increase in your state and federal aid receivables of 39 million. There's no collection issues that we noted during our audit with those receivables. All of the receivables outstanding appeared valid and could be traced to supporting documentation. It's really just a result of the timing of when the funds were spent and then when they were requested for reimbursement. Capital assets overall decrease of about $65 million, and that's due to your depreciation expense of $81 million, exceeding your current year additions of about $21 million. Looking at the pension, OPEB, and deferred resources, a net decrease of about $180 million. So we'll kind of break this out into pension and OPEB and talk about what those individual pieces are. So overall, your ERS and TRS, those are both in liability positions at June 30th, 2023. They were in asset positions as of June 30th, 2022. And this is mainly driven by some of those changes in the actuarial assumptions. Both plans were overfunded in the prior year compared to underfunded this year. So 91% for ERS, and TRS is funded at about 99% in 2023. And then the other piece of that, which is really the biggest piece that we'll talk about once we get down to that reconciliation, is your OPEB liability. So overall, your OPEB liability increased about $1.8 billion, but you kind of have to take all of the pieces that are on the balance sheet to really get the overall net impact of what happened year over year. So you have deferred inflows and deferred outflows that are sitting on the balance sheet. So when you take all three of those, it's a net of about $2.5 billion. The net in 2022 was about $2.7 billion. So the difference there is really the OPEB income that was recognized of about $135 million, as well as the benefit payments of about $55 million. So these changes mainly, again, are impacted by the changes in actuarial assumptions that come through that actuarial valuation each year. The most significant change when you look at all three pieces would be your change in inflows. The deferred inflows are amortized over a 5-year period. So in 2023, you're recognizing another piece of that significant change that happened in 2022. So if you look at the changes in deferred inflows in 22, there was a significant fluctuation, and that really had to do with an increase in the discount rate. So as the rate goes up, the liability will come down. No significant assumption changes like that during 2023. So really the main factor is picking up that piece of the significant change from 2022. And then looking at your overall long-term liabilities, that will include your outstanding bonds, workers' compensation, compensated absences, as well as leases. Those decreased $85 million, mainly driven by the required payments on debt, as well as the amortization on the premium of those outstanding bonds. So again, no new debt, really just decreasing by those required payments. Then finally, looking at your other liabilities, those increased about $46 million over 2022. A lot of this has to do with timing, so the timing of your accounts payable, when those expenses were incurred, when they were ultimately paid, as well as your accrued liabilities. And then there was an increase in the amount due to the city that is sitting in the special aid fund. So then looking, again, as I mentioned, that reconciliation that's taking you from your governmental funds down to your government-wide net income, really just impacted by all of those changes that we just discussed. And again, the most significant being that $183 million of the pension, OPEB, and other, the main driver being OPEB in that $183 million.
So if I can just do a kind of summary of everything then before we turn it over to any questions. If I were to kind of give you key takeaways from our audit, I think they would be, number one, clean opinion on your financial statements as hoped. Number two, no material weaknesses in your internal control. Some things you can work on, but nothing of huge significance to the control system of the district. And then number three, and kind of circling again to what Jim said, and maybe, I think auditors are just as hesitant as CFOs are to talk about, good operating results. You did have a very good year and took a lot of fund balance to the bottom line to increase what you have in the general fund. Jim had mentioned a lot of different pieces, again, that will impact that fund balance going forward, use of that for capital projects, the movement back from the special aid fund of the ARP ESSER expenses that you will no longer have covered by those grants. The other thing he didn't mention that I just wanted to point out is many districts have had Child Victims Act claims against them in the past couple of years because they opened that up, as you're aware, for all cases over a period of time. There have been several districts that we work with who have settled for millions of dollars. I think the largest ones I've seen are about $17.5 million. As of right now, the district does have some money that is accrued for those cases. However, based on the information from your attorneys and the fact that those cases are early in the process in discovery, there's no requirement for the district to accrue amounts, and the attorneys do not yet have any sort of probability assumption of what the district might have to pay for those, but that is always a risk. So I just want to point that out because that is something. I think you still have 18 open cases. So that is something too where that might have to be addressed as well in the next year or two. Hopefully there will not be significant payments. You have settled quite a few already that were not significant to the total expenses of the district, but I just wanted to point that out as well. So again, overall, a lot of help from management. I think a lot improved. Again, turnover last year is really what caused it. The entire new staff last year did a great job trying to help us get through this. We did have to delay the federal audit piece last year and issue that separately. We're not doing that this year. As I said, in the next day or two, we should have that all wrapped up. So really kudos for them for all of the help they gave us. It is quite a large task to audit such a large entity, and they were great and extremely responsive to us throughout the audit process. So I just want to thank them for that.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very thorough. As you summarize, we have a significant increase in our surplus, a $50 million surplus from operations, 375 million general fund balance, and a lot of it is due to the hard work and management of our CFO and his staff. They did go after additional revenues. They managed through personnel changes, and all I can say is kudos and good job. Thank you. So I open it up to the board members for any questions to our CFO.
Thank you, Chairman Woods. Yes, my first question is, you talked about our shared bank account. How much money was borrowed by the city of Buffalo?
At June 30th, there was $482 million held by the city on your behalf.
How much again?
482 million.
See, I thought it was just 400.
Yeah.
400 in the general fund.
Yeah.
You drafted the resolution.
Okay, and I know you talked about the needing to get interest off of that. We did go to a board meeting where City of Buffalo talked about their ESSER funds and that they received, their rescue act funds that they received. And they had about $7 to $9 million interest they collected off of those funds. And here, I don't see any interest that we collected off our funds that we had in our bank account. So are they collecting our interest? Or, I mean, off the ESSER funds? They should be allowed to collect interest off the ESSER funds also.
I'm going to make a quick comment on that. I've heard this feedback, and our ESSER is a reimbursement. You spend the money first, and then they pay you back. I can't imagine the city earning interest off it. What they're earning interest off of is our cash. Anyway, you slice it.
So what do we do about it? Sorry, that just really ticked me off.
That's money that was given to the city of Buffalo through federal funds to help us and our needs. And the city of Buffalo is going to collect money off the interest.
Right.
Off of that money also. I know you collect money off our state.
Yeah, from all of our different cash sources. This is
in that account.
It goes into that account. Yeah. Sarah, maybe if you want, but yeah, it's 400, whatever service.
$7 million we're talking about.
Yeah. No kidding.
On
Now
top
I
of the-
understand why I've been crazy.
I'm not sure.
$482 million.
Unfortunately, I can't guide you as to how to fix this. I can just tell you, specific to the reserves at least, and again, your only amounts actually in reserves are the three I mentioned: unemployment, judgments, property loss and claims, and your stabilization reserves. Those are by law, and the law does state that interest earned on those funds should be allocated to the reserve. So those, at least, I think, I'm not an attorney, but perhaps the attorneys would be able to argue that those funds do belong to those reserves. The rest of it, again, it is a significant amount. It is most of your cash. Other than the 482 million, the district itself is holding about 33 million in cash as of June 30th. So the vast majority of your cash does sit with the city. I would recommend, working with the city through your attorneys I would think would be the best bet.
Excuse me, did you say it was against the law?
No.
For us not to collect the money? Well, she didn't say it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, again, not an attorney, so I don't want to speak out of tune, but.
We don't want you to. So.
No, I'm sorry. I was reading the paper. I thought
We're not asking you to in that fashion. Now, from 2021, 2022, 2023, it seems that our salaries went up about $18 million from salaries. But after selling our contracts, how much more is projected for our salaries to go up?
Keep in mind that those numbers are just the portion of salaries being paid out of the general. Much of your salary costs were moved to the special aid fund in 2022 and some in 2021. So Jenna, I'm not sure if you have it handy, and if not, I can try to get to it. Oh, I do. So your total salaries have actually gone up about 106 million from 2021. Some of that is the increase because of just the settlement of 46 million that's included in that increase, but your total is up much more significantly than the 14 or 15 million you see on that slide, because that's only reflective of salaries charged to the general fund.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can I just ask a simple question?
Oh, well, wait a minute. Was Jim next?
No.
Okay, then, Madam.
So how much interest would we possibly make off of that type of money if we were receiving it for the students of the children of the Buffalo Public Schools?
482 million.
How much would we possibly, just a round figure, off of, how much money would we?
Sarah, take 4% of 300 million to be super conservative.
And how much money is that?
If I don't have
Like
my
15
Excel,
million?
I can't do anything.
15, keep in mind interest rates have skyrocketed, so it's a much larger number than it would have been in other recent years. 5% of that number would be 15 million.
Children of this district.
Sarah, just, a rough conservative estimate is 15 million now.
Excuse me? 15 million? Let the record
That would
reflect that the city of Buffalo is not paying us interest to the tune of approximately $15 million. So duly noted.
Ben is here.
It's recorded.
This has to be addressed. This has to be addressed.
It's the party's over.
It's encompassing our district and our planning. And the city of Buffalo, by my standard, is that putting up programs for community element to help solve the issues that's coming back into the Buffalo Public Schools.
What did we do? Ask her. She might.
We're the one-stop shops. Our community schools, our Saturday programming, all of the resources that we offer. Buffalo Public Schools are the one-stop shops where the city and the district, since day one, I've been asking, trying to figure out how the council and we can get along enough to be able to just communicate what's out there in our districts. And I'm gonna put it out there again. And I just did. Ben, you got this. I'm over this. That's a huge number.
Communication is that the things that happen in the city comes into our schools. And then we left to deal with the issues, the fights, all the problematic problems, adults coming back to high school fighting children and insulting our children. And
bus drivers.
And what we receive from the Buffalo Public Schools is the police to come and try to arrest these individuals. That's the only service we receive.
Every year that's listed in our audit, isn't it? If I can remember.
It
right.
is, yes. And I'd just like to remind you too that 15 million is this year's calculation. That number would have been a fraction of that number in prior years. I just want to be clear about that. It would have been a much smaller number because interest has been close to zero for a number of years.
We've never been in greater financial health in terms of our fund balance and our cash, and interest rates have gone up. Yes, thank you, sir.
Yes, but by saying that, that's because we minimize the services we give to our kids to meet the other demands.
It's a real issue.
Our kids are not receiving any, services or families.
I believe it's time for us to tell the city of Buffalo that the flat line, the 70 million, needs to increase by at least the 15 million that they're earning on our money.
There's 700,000 kids.
There's that.
Chairwoman Woods, do you recall, we've discussed this many, many times, since I've been on the board, probably before I was on the board, it's been discussed. Have we ever passed a resolution demanding some resolution to this interest rate that is ours?
I don't believe a resolution.
I don't believe we passed the resolution, no.
We're having meetings, if I'm not
Right,
mistaken,
right.
Chairman was up to meetings with the comptroller to try and separate the accounts or to at least address it. But other than that, I don't know of any other action that was taken in the resolutions.
We've actually had several meetings with the controller because this is an accounting pronouncement that's on our accounting books, and we raised it with the controller of the city of Buffalo because she's their chief accounting officer. But she takes it to the mayor and his finance people, and then they came back with a publication of all the things that they supposedly do for us, and that it more than offsets any interest they were earning. And, at the time when interest rates were 0.1,
I don't want to go too deep into that, but we're using the bulk of our monies on capital projects to fix these older, the mounting buildings up with our funds that the city owns.
And when
And
they
if they're not here, the city don't own it.
money back, that's in the law too.
Well, maybe it's time for us to actually pass a resolution, and give it to our attorney to pursue.
I guess we should.
Is it true that the city do own these?
Our previous superintendent wasn't willing to pursue that, but I think our new superintendent might be
There were
willing
supposed
to
to be
pursue that.
conversations.
I don't think it's the responsibility of the superintendent. It's the board. It's the board.
Well, then, I think that's what we should pursue.
New board, new attitude.
Okay,
We don't even get a thank you.
pardon me?
You don't even get a thank you letter.
Thank you, people glorify volunteers.
We don't get a thank you letter, a pat on the back.
That's exactly what we
Anything.
stated.
Okay, Mr. Scott, you still have the floor, are you?
I'm concluded. I just want to, I just feel like we've gone around in circles on this. And it is appalling to hear how much money we should be, that should be coming back to us, and we should be spending on our kids and our programs and services.
And we're not even talking about the money that we pay them for doing fees, service fees for us and things like that, like when we, our bonds, when we calculate, we position ourselves with that, that's a lot of money too. I just think that in fairness to the children of this district, if we have not had a raise, and you saw in here, the city of Buffalo's contribution has not changed for what, 20 years, is it?
Once,
Okay, not, okay.
once in maybe 20 years,
Yeah, well,
$500,000.
Yeah, okay.
It was your presentation at that one meeting that I
We
was
met
at.
with the mayor.
Yes, we did.
And didn't we
But
present together at that?
we asked for an increase, and what ended up happening is they took from Sayas Buffalo and allocated an increase to BPS.
Yeah. And so meanwhile, what I said at our previous meeting is that we cannot deal with these children and their, what's going on outside of our building without additional support from the city. So you're expecting us to police our buildings and police the community outside. It's not fair. It's not fair. And it's not reasonable. We can't, it's not even realistic. There's no ownership piece in this, none.
$482 million. I
Oh,
just
it's
want,
only 400.
I wrote it, it's there, I'm repeating it.
It's 400,000 in the general
I
fund.
would any uncomfortable situation might ask you that question, but it's something for this board to take a look at and try to find some resolution to it. Thank you.
Do we have any other board members who'd like to raise any questions?
That's why we ain't signing that final.
Okay, usually Ms. Cotman points out the $18 million in vacancy savings is what schools are they coming from? But that's not your question today? No.
Next steps. As far as what will be the next steps.
We're getting our money.
Think about.
I guess we can draft a resolution and give it to our attorney to review and make sure it's sound. But yeah, $15 million is something we definitely need to pursue.
Okay, Chairman Woods, that falls under your committee?
Falls under my committee.
Then.
So the gloves will come off. We've been nice. The gloves need to come off.
The drafting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, and what time is it?
Almost 7 o'clock, 6:58.
I had one other question. So the list of things that typically have not, or are recommendations for us to do that was given to us last year, will they be included in this package this year? It was like a list of things that you were supposed to meet and.
They presented, and you'll see that in the audit, prior years plus, yes.
I did have
They're
one.
both included.
I didn't hear much anything about the grants, or the grants that may be available or added to the program.
I'm not sure if I heard correctly, but grants, we did have a comment on the grants and the accounting for those. That was, I think, our first point within the management letter. And just ensuring that the revenue is only recognized as revenue when you've expended the grant funds. Otherwise, you either owe it back to the grant source, the funder, or it's deferred as a liability and recognized as revenue in the subsequent year when it's spent.
Yes, but do you have a number on the amount of number of grants that we received on last year? Is there an actual number that we have?
I can get you that, Mr. Hurt.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure.
Okay. I don't think we have any more questions for our auditors. We want to thank you for your hard work and your presentation.
Number one, thank you, Sarah and Jenna. Thanks for all your work. You guys are great, and we look for your guidance and your holding us accountable. Thank you.
Thank you all. We appreciate it. Have a good night.
Good night. And the second thing with the super here and a couple more board members, I did bring some staff members, super.
Okay.
And God, with great results. We need to celebrate before we face these challenges, and they're big ones. But these guys make it happen every day. It's a very large, complex organization financially. There's Derek Nelson. He's budget examiner and plan. Andrew Onigi. He's our controller, and he started at the exact same time as me. We went through heck together, and he's doing a phenomenal job. Chuck Silvermoza, he took over a lot of my responsibilities as deputy and stepped in, and he's doing a phenomenal job.
For the budget.
On the budget. And then Kim German, she's in charge of our charter school. Then we have Jennifer Latempio, who's our acting director, soon to be director. And I was giving purchasing, yeah. And I was giving a couple of things what these guys do. Jennifer, $400 million a year in purchases, 8,900 recs and POs with 1,500 vendors. Kim German, 10,000 charter enrollments. She checks everyone, audits everyone. It's like a one-person placement office for a number of students larger than almost any other district. Chuck Construction manages $1 billion budget. Derek is stepping into the plant area in the midst of all these capital projects issue and is doing a phenomenal job. And Andrew is the chief accountant for the district. He's the guy that keeps us all in line and makes sure all the debits and credits are correctly across 6 funds.
And he looks that same?
And we're missing a couple. Rachel Mallard is the one largely responsible for those revenue increases. Danielle Schwanekamp's got a family issue tonight. $200 million in grants, including the RPSR. And these guys are experts and they work their tails off.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thanks for listening.
Well, before he leaves, I want to just say that we also need to thank our fairly new CFO, because as we heard from the auditors, this is a really good year. We had a very clean audit. There was really, no weaknesses that were found. And I think you have done, a yeoman's job coming into a complex role. And you at the same time are educating me always. Yeah. We meet every week. I think we also need to give thanks to our chairwoman of this committee because, she works with you an awful lot. I know that you guys were meeting, when was it, Monday on the holiday?
That's right.
You were here meeting, and so I think it's, due to a lot of the work of both of you and certainly to this new young team out here that is working tirelessly. Thank you. Thank you all.
And what a diverse team it is.
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that concludes the finance and operations. I turn it over to our executive affairs chairperson, Dr. Kathy Evans Brown.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
We do that a lot. I know, right? We do that a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. Cliff. I'll be talking next.
No more Mondays though on holidays. No more Mondays, that's right. Enjoy your holiday. Well, we needed to go with just let me know which one.
That's an either one. I always wanted to do this.
You do it very well.
Good evening, everyone.
So this is
Our Executive Affairs Committee, and we do have a guest, I shouldn't say guest, our consultant online, Leslie Grant. Just a reminder that we went into went into a contractual relationship with the Council of Great City Schools for a change, right? So it's more of a student outcomes governance. It's projected to last about 2 years with a focus on increased student outcomes. We charged our superintendent, Dr. Williams, with 3 goals, and she eloquently produced those, I think, last month at our board meeting. And the 3 goals, just in sum, were a focus on third grade economically disadvantaged students for increased literacy in math. And the third one was increased graduation rates. President Belton Cotman recommended 3 board members to jumpstart the implementation process, chaired by board member Cindy McCutcheon, along with board member Shuda and myself, and coaching from AJ Cabral and Leslie Grant, who are with the Council of Great City Schools. And so with that, I'm going to move over to Dr. Williams to add, and then introduce Cindy for updates with where we are in terms of our implementation process. We've met at least 2 times.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman, Dr. Evans Brown. Certainly, you know, the goals, I'm saying them over and over, and as I shared, you know, I call them the Niners, so they're easy to remember. 39%, 15.9%, and 79.1%. Those are the goals. We right now have posters being created because I want to see them in schools, you know. One of the requirements that I have for our schools this year is that our data is visual. It's no hidden anything. It is what it is. So we have posters and flyers being made up. I'll make sure that the board gets some flyers, but more, you know, everywhere I go, I'm talking about these 3 goals. I'll be convening with our, my data-driven team of cabinet members so that we can start looking at our schools. Our students have taken the beginning of the year dibble, so I want to see where our benchmark is. Where are we right now so that we know where we have to get to. It won't be an I gotcha. Won't be a surprise in June when we make it to all of these 3 goals, because we will. And so I'm going to turn things over to Board Member McCutcheon, and I want to say hello to Leslie, who I see. Hi, Leslie. Hi, Leslie. Sorry, I think we went a little later than you probably anticipated, but hopefully the weather down there is a lot nicer than it is here. We're freezing up here, but I'm sure in Atlanta it's pretty warm down there, so welcome.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. So as Kathy mentioned, the implementation team has met twice now. And at our very first meeting, I know it's exciting, Leslie tasked our team with some homework right off the bat that we had to dive into. So the team split up worked together, and some of the homework that we had to accomplish was to become familiar with our board policies. What do those look like? I can tell you once it's printed, it is an incredibly heavy book that I could use as a weight, honestly, when I'm working out. So we did then consult with legal and look at the policies to determine of all of the policies that we have, what policies are non-negotiables, they're required by law, which I will say is the vast majority, and which ones are open for discussion, meaning that they are created by the district or the board, but they are not required under law. We will eventually focus a little bit of time on those policies to determine what are truly district policies and maybe not board policies, and what is a board policy, right? Because there's mixtures in those spaces. And so we will start spending some time looking at that. But at the very least, we have separated that out and have an idea of what that means. So we will start moving that forward. We also were taking a little bit of a dive into our committees as they stand. While we know that they exist and they are referenced by name in our policies, there is absolutely no definition as to what our committees do. So there is another task that we will likely start taking on, is exploring our 4 committees that exist, not the ad hocs, not the additionals, the 4 that are listed in our policies, and better defining the role of the committees. So that'll be another element that we will be taking on, and that was another objective in our first round of homework assignments. And the last piece, and probably the most complicated or heaviest of it all, was guardrails. So as you guys know, and everybody sitting at this table has received a copy of AJ's book, Great on Their Behalf. And in there, in chapter 8, he talks about guardrails. Guardrails create the non-negotiables that must be honored while moving through the goals on the way to the vision for improved student outcomes. So that's the point of the guardrail. We talked about guardrails when we had our session with Leslie and we were working on goals with the superintendent and guardrails surrounding that. Those are the shall nots. Those are the things that are non-negotiables. Just as it's important for the superintendent and the district to have that, we as a board also need that. So Leslie's and AJ's last challenge to us for this first round of homework assignments was to explore guardrails and what that means for us. So the team, we worked with Leslie and AJ, and we got feedback from them at our last meeting, which took place on October 6th, and developed a draft list of guardrails that I am hopeful we may agree upon or come to consensus on, and you should have all received that in your packet, and I know you all received them via email as well, that we as a board are agreeing to. If we all agree to it, I would like us to, obviously publicly adopt our guardrails at the board meeting next week, and then they go into effect. And they are our way to keep ourselves in check as well. So guardrail 1, it shall not invest less than 50% of its minutes each month into monitoring student outcome goals. We are actually going to look at that. Now we're going through the process as Dr. Evans-Brown shared. It is almost a 2-year process. So we're not expected to have a shift immediately, but we did draft goals and interim goals for the superintendent, and we are going to start moving into that direction of reporting out on some of those things, and we're going to see that start to shift, right, a little bit of the way we talk and what we talk about in our meetings. Guardrail 2, shall not perform or appear to perform any of the responsibilities delegated to the superintendent.
All right.
We should not necessarily be in the operations. We are supporting, we are governing, we are our big picture, and the superintendent, she is the individual that is steering the ship, and we are there to support that as that goes forward, but we shouldn't be in the operations. Guardrail 3, shall not violate any board-adopted policy or district procedure. As I mentioned, we got a lot of policies. So we may want to refresh ourselves on some of them, right? But our goal is to be in compliance with the policies that we have established and we have agreed are currently active, right, with the district and the board. And guardrail 4. This one was actually, AJ helped us tweak this one and cultivate this last guardrail. And then shall not behave in a manner that would violate the student code of conduct. So if we expect our students to act a certain way, we should expect to behave the same way. And that's the theory behind this particular guardrail. In your email, and you don't have it here, but you did get it electronically, was the most recent Student Code of Conduct. Page 22, 23, 24 of that Code of Conduct are, I would say, probably the most pivotal out of that document, because it is a thick, document. It's got a lot of stuff in it that we need to think about in terms of the way we hold ourselves accountable and what that looks like. Lastly, and then we will go back to discussing the guardrails, but just in terms of implementation and update, lastly, we were challenged by Leslie to consider in advance of meeting with community stakeholders and going out there and doing kind of the community meetings to potentially do a small book study with stakeholders that we know are active and invested, such as the Ed Spadels of the world, and do a book study using AJ's book to help others understand the process that we're about to go through in advance of kicking out those community meetings and starting to engage. When we have key stakeholders that are incredibly invested in everything that we are doing, understanding the process that we're about to go through, it makes the process flow better. So it would be not anything massive as an undertaking, but something small that we could take on, and it would be a refresher for us, for those of us that want to participate, and then obviously for some key stakeholders in the community to join us in this endeavor in this space. Yeah.
So when you say key stakeholders, are you talking also about staff? Because would that tie into them understanding what the superintendent is going through?
Leslie, I thought my understanding was more community outside of the district, but I could have misunderstood that too.
I think that it would be completely appropriate if the staff wanted together to have a book study around this. That would be great. I would not have that led by the board or a board member, but certainly I would hope that Superintendent Williams, you want to encourage your staff to really, start to shift their mindset around what the work is you're doing. You are charged with cascading the goals throughout the district into the classroom, and it actually could be a really helpful way to get that understanding across.
I think that's a great idea, and I know that you've already had the opportunity to meet with several of my cabinet staff just to kind of give them a high-level overview of the work that the board is engaged in and what our goals are and how the goals were obtained. So I think that's a great first step.
Okay.
The ladies were first.
Okay, who was first?
I just want to clarify. We were talking about having small group book studies, like identifying a little spot in each of our little districts. I'm thinking like Dog Ears Bookstore. And then, so it would be more, not something that's perhaps the large district, but us really getting to our constituents in a smaller group, having smaller book studies, right?
As long as folks are able to lead them, right? So
yes.
We can have discussions surrounding it. It's the ability of folks to be able to devote that time, each of us, if we're able to in the, in our specific districts, that would be ideal. But,
Yeah, we were thinking, involving all a smaller constituent, north, south, west, east. I don't know what that looks like, but it sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds good. That would be something that we continue to talk about. Yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be discussed here. This was more of an update for you. I think the most important and critical piece to, if there's going to be discussion around, and if there are any questions or clarifying points, is the guardrails, because our board meeting is next Wednesday. Yes.
All right, so.
Without getting into specifics, I hear what you're saying. I think I would like for us to really identify amongst each other, and especially for the three of you, what everyone's strength is in your eyes on this board in order to cultivate this activity, right? And I speak to this because you have 3 at-large members who's everybody, so you can't district them. How do you bring them into the mix with the folks who are? So it's just now that you're moving forward is to really, I would, you know, I would appreciate if everybody, you know, we can look at each other and know what we bring to the table, but if you dig into that, I feel like all of this would really, you know, so I'm just hoping that that's where y'all going with this.
It's just, she challenged us at the end of our meeting to begin exploring this.
Okay.
So if you haven't done that.
That's my suggestion while you're exploring.
Exploring the concept.
And within the committee, we all have different strengths.
Yes.
She's a young gal with the computer, and, and on the big picture, and we're Justin. We're all working pretty closely together. We're meeting on a regular basis, and we're trying to get the work done.
And can I jump in real quick? I just wanted to say this is all the way that we sort of did the goals and guardrails for the superintendent. That was to give you all as a board a metric for this next year that you didn't have last year in terms of her evaluation, so that you had very fixed, you know, concrete, SMART goals to evaluate her on this year. And so it was kind of a, you know, a mini practice. The way that we really want you to work to develop the goals and guardrails that you will use in this process that you will use will be more involved and in depth. And we will get to that later. Just with the timing, the end of the year, with the holidays, you know, it makes no sense to try and do this big process now. So what we were thinking was it might be good if you wanted to try and circulate the book around the communities, you know, and just what feels natural, I think. But when we begin the process of the community engagement, the listening sessions that you as board members are going to do, you will put together a list, and you will identify everybody that you believe is community that needs to be, you know, where those places are and who needs to be heard and everything. So this is just one of those other sort of like, you know, primer activities for you to just start thinking about, oh, okay, if I had to get together and engage a group of, you know, of folks, who would that be? And certainly having people understand, you know, it's a pretty easy book. You know, I think a group might be great just to help folks who, you know, maybe aren't familiar with EduSpeak the way, but it's a pretty easy book. And I think having people understand the terminology, the rationale, why you're doing this. You are the only district in New York State that is taking on this activity and this like shift in the way that you operate. And you should be very proud of that and highly commended. But what you are doing is not the way that boards normally interact, not the way they do their business. So explaining that to the community is difficult. The book is a great way just to sort of break the ice and bring it to the community. So, and again, we have middle of October, 2.5 months until the end of the year. And, you know, it just might be nice if we could go out. Don't have to do a big, huge, you know, huge discussion about this, but just if a couple of you wanted to get together and make sure that you're, you know, doing it and make sure everybody's on board with it, that would be helpful.
Thank you. I think it's another form of buy-in too, you know, for this newness that we're about to set in terms of standard or blueprint, etc. Larry.
Thank you. So I wholeheartedly agree, support these guardrails. I look forward to voting in support of them next Wednesday. I appreciate the work that's gone into them, attaching all the policies. I actually took the time to go through those policies because
look at you.
Maybe I looked at them when I first started on the board, but it's just good to see it all in one place and give some background rationale for why we have these guardrails. And I think to your point, Cindy, that, we have high expectations for the superintendent. We have high expectations for our students, our staff, our parents, and we need to also have our own high expectations that we abide by. As similar to what we were talking about before about our parents being accountable and responsible, we also need to be responsible and emulate what we expect from others. The book idea, I think, is phenomenal. I think there's often a misunderstanding of the role of the board, individual board members, board as a whole, and the superintendent. And many times people come to us thinking we manage and want us to change. And I think it would be just so helpful to educate the community on really just our role as a board and what the superintendent's role is in managing the district and how that's different from us as board members. So I completely support that idea as well.
And to add, I think, in all credit to our president, I remember when I first came on the board 4 years ago, she's always wanted to review the policies. Let's look at the policies. And I'm thinking that's really huge. And so we have an opportunity now to really, dive into, this quest and really make a difference for this district. So anybody? Okay, President.
So let me ask a question. Okay, so this book study, is it one session or how do you guys, does AJ have well, used to belong to a book club? They used to have questions and stuff. Does AJ have that or do we do that? How does that work?
So it was an idea that was thrown out at us as we were getting off the call. I added it to the update more or less as just an FYI. It was we have not explored it yet.
Okay.
It was a suggestion. At the call, a suggestion that kicked out for us to think about and figure out how this could work. I wanted to make sure everybody knew my biggest concern, and I'm going to keep beating it until in a very restorative way. Might I add, okay, until we, finish talking about this, because I just want to make sure that we all do support this idea and the guardrails. And when we, are sitting there next week, Wednesday, and the conversation comes up, right, about the guardrails, that we're all familiar, we're comfortable with what's in here, we know what the ask is and the expectation, and, with that comes a level of accountability. So it's so important that this is given space for us to think about, right, and commit to, because it's so important if we're going to continue to move through this process.
Okay. So can I just bring up one other thing here? It's a little off topic, but it isn't. Earlier we were talking about the adults, the roles or the functions of adults. Do you think it might now be a time to do an adult code of conduct for this district?
You're talking about including parents, the citations that has happened this year?
Code of conduct includes.
It's really a student, slightly, but I wonder contractually, let me speak to Chief Kuzma and just.
The only reason I'm saying that is that if we're expecting parents or adults to act a certain way, and then we don't have anything to guide them into that, are we, not realistic? So that's all I was talking about.
Because we've had incidents, too many. I mean, one is too many, when you have a parent that come in and beat a kid down.
Yeah, lawfully, I don't think we can address that. I think that falls under domestic and
domestic
other abuses. Yeah, the domestic incidents with the police department.
We can address.
No, what I'm saying is, I think this is what I'm hearing Sharon say, that, just like we have code of conduct for children, the expectations should, I remember as a parent of kids in the district, we used to have a parent code of something, I mean, I probably can't find it, but I remember reading about our expectations as parents.
I remember something 2 years ago.
Right, and
I remember.
Can I interrupt real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're good with this.
I was waiting for Leslie. I was waiting for Leslie to chime in.
I just,
Support. We can't vote at the table, but we all said we support.
We can encourage parents to be the.
I just want to ask the question though, is the conversation around an adult code of conduct, would that not be under the superintendent's purview to establish?
Well, if
Okay,
it's going to
so-
be a policy, or it ultimately ends up as something that the board is requesting her to do, it might be her purview, but it's under the direction of the board requesting her to do it. Because this is something we've never done. So ultimately, it would become a policy of the board. So it's
So the board
twofold.
is
Yes, the
requesting-
superintendent has a role, and the board also has a role. Okay, if the board is going to, if the superintendent's going to do the work, she doesn't want to do the work, and then the board don't approve it as a policy. Okay, so the code of conduct is part of the policy, so it's just an idea. And the reason that we're doing that is because of the behaviors that we've seen recently in our district. So no, we have no problem with the superintendent doing it. The question is it something that the board would like to get behind and possibly see the superintendent do? That's what we're talking about.
I think to the superintendent's point, the question is, what can we do? And I would
Right.
love to be able to talk about this more.
Yeah.
And certainly with educational support, depending on what you all decide as chairs, but safety is a big issue. I assume we're going to continue talking about it. It's something that
Under
we
your
have
committee.
I don't want to speak for you,
Under your
but
committee.
it's just a suggestion for consideration. Okay.
We just got some problems.
So I do want to be clear, that everybody understands what the guardrails are for the board. And I also would suggest that you come up, I would suggest, since you're using the student code of conduct, which I do think, yes, you should hold yourselves at least accountable to what students are held accountable to, but that you go through there maybe and call that out specifically. The entire document is an attachment to this, is probably not great, but call out specifically in those last pages, 22, 23, 24, what those specific behaviors are that a board member may, engage in. That would be problematic. And then also, I would like you to consider what are the consequences of this. So if you're, like amongst yourselves, there's one statement, I believe, in terms of the penalty, and it's just not very clear. So that would be something to get to as well, is an understanding amongst yourselves, like what if one of us, refuses to, abide by our guardrails that we put in place? What are the consequences? What is the fallout from that choice? So that would be something to look at.
New book,
Leslie, do you recommend that being something that, is continued to be discussed, or that the implementation takes on, or that we do it at, work session next month? How do you, in between, email? Do you have any suggestions there?
I think this is a full board idea. A full board conversation. The consequences are for all of you. So I would recommend if somebody wanted to draft something, if they feel like that is, or to research from other districts, I would, have that be a person or two. The implementation committee has proven their ability to go ferret some things out. So perhaps that could be something you do. But again, if you, it's the point of the student outcomes focused governance is getting really clear about what you want, having, measurable data, and having consequences for, that you show to the public. This is what we're holding ourselves accountable to. And if not, what, right? Because when we get to the real student outcomes piece, the real goals and guardrails, the consequences of that are the superintendent's evaluation, so that there are real consequences to her performance in driving the district. So again, are you going to have real consequences to your commitments to these guardrails to your colleagues? So
as a board. So if we don't have, go ahead.
Any discussion?
And so I think that, the implementation team is willing to do some research and look at what other districts have done, what other guardrails, and obviously take Leslie and AJ's brain too, to the best and extract any extras we can out of them that could be helpful for this conversation, and put together a draft document that we can then share again electronically to everybody of what that looks like. Yes, ma'am.
So could you also get from Leslie a sample board meeting of what it looks like to have 50% of the meeting spent on student data?
Student outcomes.
Student outcome using the data so that the board can at least see it in practice, what it's doing, so they can have a better idea of what we're talking about. Because there are some districts that are doing it, and I think it would help us to just look at some of those meetings so that we can see where we want to aspire to.
Yeah, absolutely. I can send you a meeting or two of a couple of districts that are doing that monitoring progress. You are not going to get here for a while, and we're, that's going to be something we understand that.
Inspired to do that.
It is going to take a while. But what you can do, and this is going to be very important, and I can certainly help coach you through it, but I can't be responsible for doing it because I'm not going to be here forever. And you have to have a process and understanding amongst your board members how you are going to do your time use evaluations. So quarterly, what we're going to start expecting of you is to do a quarterly time use evaluation. And that's literally where you go through and either by the minutes or the videos, you time what you spent your time on. So you say, okay, we spent this amount of time on, fluffy buses and this amount of time on whatever, but you actually code your time so that you get practice at it. And that is how you understand what you're actually doing. So if you want to think about who is a great timekeeper, who is the person most likely to follow along and do this work, that would be great. And maybe, you may delegate to staff if that is as a complement to that. But I do think it's very important that board members understand what this process is.
I think it goes back to what we did as principals and Dr. Williams when we were on the SAMS project. And we really framed out our time, and this is how much time you should be using. And we had a coach that every day kept me in line and made sure I was doing what I needed to do when I needed to do it. And I think it's pretty much the same premise,
I do have a question about that. If you're discussing a very important topic or a conversation, and it's limited to a time limit, how do we go about that? I don't see a way that we can cut something off that may be a critical issue to this district and saying that it's going to be done in a certain time frame.
Student outcomes are pretty critical.
That's it. That's what the commitment is. Student outcome focused.
But if we in a conversation about it, then time ends. Are you expecting for us to stop the conversation on it at that time? Or are we just to move on to the next subject, or are we to continue on to be able to have more time allowed? We have to ask for more time allowed? I'm not quite sure how this works.
I wouldn't get too terribly concerned right now about trying to stop clocks and that piece. The goal of this is to drive you towards behaviors that support improvements in student outcomes and monitoring the progress of students. Understanding, having conversations with your superintendent about the reality for students in the district is something that helps improve student outcomes. There may be an issue that comes up that is critically important and you need to talk about that. You have 50% of your time left, right? So again, it's not, nobody's sitting there with a stopwatch going, okay, move along. But again, it is, the goal of this is to get you to think about the things that you have determined are critical have to do right now, the things you've determined are critical have to do with your third grade literacy, your maths, and your college and career. Those are the things that you have given her, the superintendent, to focus on this year. And that's what we want to get you to spend your time and attention on. Because the more oars you throw in the water going in a different direction for her, distract her from the work she's doing. And so that's kind of the point of this paying attention to the time. And it's an after the fact. The time use evaluation is okay, in this meeting we did this, so that you can inform future behaviors. Again, nobody's sitting there with a stopwatch, so.
I think you'll realize, parents, once you get into the practice, it really starts to go natural. And I think like it's in the beginning, it's a true shift. But once you start doing it, you'll never even think about that part. It'll really just kind of flow that way. It's really an amazing way how it works.
Leslie, I have a question. Leslie?
Yep.
We just spent, we called an entire meeting about school safety and the safety of the children. How does that fit into the three outcomes? But the children can't learn if the school's unsafe. So how does that work?
So I would encourage you not to, I mean, if we want to do a time use evaluation right now, was that conversation specifically focused on one of the three goals that you've given the superintendent or the guardrails? And just, again, we are in this light, and I don't want you to, there are some guardrails that the superintendent that you identified for her. We did not put the interims to that. We don't have, like actual things we're trying to hit there. It's more ideas and values to be protected. And so I would say that probably comes into, under one of the guardrails. But the nature of those conversations and, what you're actually talking about during those are, that would be where you would code that.
I think the
Probably a guardrail.
Yeah.
Communication.
When Dr. Williams made the presentation, the very beginning of it, she outlined her three goals and then stated that in order to be able to perform these goals, she had to make sure that our students are safe and secure. So I feel like she took onus of the meeting and why, and it wouldn't fall on us because she's stating that her goals hinge on the meeting that we were having. So that's how I felt it connected. Am I wrong in that? I feel like it was a very purposeful meeting, and I liked how you prefaced it.
I think the other piece of that is that the superintendent cannot carry all the weight on her shoulders. And when we have community people on the radio and calling us up talking about, they don't, and people, parents saying the children are not safe or whatever, it's a community issue that today I felt it was a pivotal change that happened in this administration. Superintendent stood up, the superintendents reported completely out. All eyes were focused on the superintendent, not on her staff, on the superintendent, that she is the one that's in control in this district, and the buck stops with her. But in fairness to her, to expect for her to be able to fix the problems that exist where the parents are fighting the kids outside of school and all this other stuff, and still expect for her to do hers, the conversation now from the community is they want to talk about what they can do.
That's right.
They've already started meeting with her about the village concept that they want to start talking about. So in fairness to her, I think today was essential to get it out there. I'm doing my part. What are you guys gonna do to help you get your children educated is what happened today. I really feel that happened. Whether, and it was essential that it happened irregardless of the way it, went about. And I commend the board members who reached out to do it. Kudos to you for at least identifying that there was the need to do it. And I think it'll go a long way. I really do. I think it'll go a long way to help her get to where she want to go. Because it's time out. Yeah. We are not the problem. We're not. That's the truth. Buffalo Public Schools is not the problem. Okay?
And we cannot be everything to everybody.
We cannot be everything to everybody. And that's what they're expecting, and it's not going to happen.
Well, at that meeting, didn't get a chance to say anything, but I wanted to commend the superintendent for making a very real point that everything that's going on in that community walks in our schools. I have a young lady who called me because the community is so dangerous that unless somebody's walking with her, her mother makes her carry a knife for protection. But she can't bring that into school. And if she forgot that she had it in her bag, now she's getting suspended. And it's a no-win. If the community isn't safe and people don't feel safe and they got drugs out there and they got needles next to the schools, somebody else is responsible for that, not us. The safety in the community must be the police, the city of Buffalo paying for it, and other people.
But we have a responsibility to get schools safe. And so any of us that are saying that our schools, we had a situation today, and for us to paint that we don't have problems, we're not going to get better. So I think this is the beginning. There was an open conversation. I get the situation. Those of you who are not dealing with some of these high-risk high schools, they're hurting. And so let's get to the drawing board, and I think you're getting to the drawing board, and I appreciate that. But there was let's just be honest, and I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to like tell you what I'm hearing, and I was boots on the ground, and I still have some boots on the ground, and we've got to just all work together. We can't get better unless we say, yes, there was a problem at Riverside today. Is Riverside going to be our new McKinley? I don't know.
I've been fielding calls, and I have friends that are teachers there, and it's in my district, and I don't have the answers. And that's the communication that's necessary that we do.
It's the adult factor, whether you want to admit it or not. There's only so much we can do. If you're sending your kid to school and your kid is behaving like that, there's a problem. Okay, because we cannot control your child if you don't have any control over them.
And I get that, but I'm saying that we
I don't want to interrupt.
No,
but I don't want us to go down a rabbit hole at this point that we do not need to go down. For the sake of everybody's time, I'm going to just ask that. Okay. So that is my update. We know the guardrails. We know where the implementation team is. I swear we'll have more information about a book study that we can wrap our brains around. Leslie, I don't know if you have anything else to say. I am hopeful that you're good.
Again, I would just encourage you to think about, I know you want to get this, clarified next month or next week at the board meeting. But think about the consequence piece of the guardrails, right? If there are zero teeth to it, like there's a whole list of consequences for students, the different tiers of, different level of, interventions that happen with students. And just think about that with yourselves, like what would be something that, is appropriate to, get somebody to rethink that behavior. The other thing would be to look at the guardrails again that you agreed to for your superintendent for this year. And just be mindful of that. If the focus is on the guardrails that you agreed to there, what is where do these conversations come in? So, and how can they be framed in context of those? You have a lot about culturally relevant curriculum, making sure that you engage partnerships throughout the district. So just try to keep driving things back to those, right? And this piece around sharing what you were bringing up around, this is not just a BPS issue, right? Like, so where are those partnerships? And just, again, try to keep referring back to the goals and guardrails. And thank you, Superintendent Williams, for getting those printed up and pasted around, and it can only be helpful.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Leslie, so much.
Wait till we adjourn.
And thank you, Cindy, for the update to the board. We have our guardrails. It sounds like more work needs to be done in terms of researching what the consequences are for us as board members. I mean, this is critical thinking, and, you know, this process is not going to happen overnight. So we all have to, you know, use critical thinking. If you could take some time to do some research as well before, when is the board meeting next week? Wednesday.
I mean, it's only 4 little guardrails, goodness. That seemed okay to me.
It's only 4, so, yeah. I
think it's the consequences that.
Yeah, of them.
Implementation is always the challenge.
That's it.
You don't work on a resol, right? You want our 15 vote. We were going to pass a resol. We had one drafted, I believe.
For which part?
And then Cash took it. Remember, he took it away from us. And he said no, he wanted to work with them.
Can I do one last mention? I'm sorry. Your student board rep is there, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, you left before I could, the last meeting. I just wanted to say hello. And if you have, your student group has an interest in having a conversation about what the board is doing with this work, we'd be happy to work with you there and set up a Zoom or something if y'all wanted to learn more about the work, so.
We need to get let's be in contact.
Well, so we started the book study, right?
It's some books in the, we still have extra books, don't we?
We can order.
Shucks, I can read it too light. I can't steal it. It doesn't matter.
Dr. Evans Brown, are you concluding us?
Yeah, so with that.
Pound the gavel.
That's what.
Well, meeting adjourned.
Everybody, get that check out of your life.
I will.
After I drove all that.
Oh, thank you, Paulette. You know I love you.
Yeah, if I known you were going to get it, I would have brought it here.
You know what? I thought about it yesterday.